Oh boy, I'm dark as heck. I'm too dark. I'm too dark. Let there be light. Now I am less of the dark, I think. Not really. Oh wow. I guess my window there is just letting in so much light. It's like get rolled. Can I? Holy cow. Yes, the natural world. It turns out, guys, that the sun itself can produce more light than little globes and stuff like that. Who knew? Right? Who knew? All right, let's grab the guitar. Haven't tuned this guy, so we're gonna get what we get. Hope your Monday is going well. I have actually had a really great Monday today. I've decided I'm going to spend a good portion of my days I've been approaching these audiobooks with a little kind of just I'll do a bit at a time. And I've just decided no, I'm going to do big chunks now. I'm going to focus more I want to do 4 hours of recording a day. Hey Islam, how you doing? And it makes me feel so much better. I feel way more accomplished. I feel like I can get way more done. And I'm in that period of time now where I need to go out and audition again and do all that. But it's like fishing, right? If you don't put your reel in the water, you can't get the fish. But we'll see how it goes. I hope you guys had a good weekend. I'm literally losing my whole life to Elden Ring at the moment. It's just absurd. It's super absurd. Yep, glory be, mercy me, we are back at it again. You know what song I want to play? I didn't even know what song I wanted to play when I picked up the guitar, but I'm playing this one a lot. And Famita, this one's for you. These times they are uncertain, of that there is no doubt. And nobody can tell me quite what it's all about. The heartbreak and the loneliness, the chaos and the fear will make even the strongest cry, I wish my ma was here. A young man on a battlefield fights for a rich man's gold. The bullet cracks into his spine, he knows he won't grow old. And as the tears come streaming down, his mind at once goes clear. The war was fought for nothing, he cries, I wish my ma was here. A lively story well in hand, a joke to soothe your soul. And when it came to arguing, she'd forgive and let it go. And when I cried, she held me, told me it's okay, my dear. And as we face these darkened days, I wish my ma was here. And as we march into the streets, as all the righteous do, we'll raise our voices to the skies, they cannot stop the truth. And as we tear their structures down, we'll raise a victory cheer. We made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. Yeah, we made the world a better place, and I wish my ma was here. So, to me, the big news of what's going on today, near as I can tell, people are starting to realize, thank you, Islam, I appreciate that so much. That's so kind of you. People are starting to realize, hey guys, did you know that if people can't afford to buy things, they don't buy them. Did you know that? Right? Thank you, Yetis. I appreciate it. Yeah, it is a cathartic song, isn't it? There's something about it. Some of my songs are like more ragey. I think I'd like 2020 is like that. But some of them are more just accepting. You know what I mean? Like I think Antarctica is like that, where it's just more like this is where we're at. This is how it is, right? It's less raging against it and more just accepting the reality of it, which I think we've got to, right? Like, we're getting ourselves into a position with the economy here. Oh, look at this article. You're not going to be able to put it in the chat, dude. Just tell me what to search, okay? We're just getting ourselves into a position as a society where, like, we're fading into entropy. The whole thing is going to come down on us, and when it does, looks like our political class is basically kind of just shrugging about it. You know, that the expressions that are coming out of the quote unquote resistance, like which would be like the NDP, we're not up to the task, and so we're just millennials are changing power dynamics in the workplace. Like, hey Major, how you doing? Oh. Let's hold on. Maybe that's not the right one. Business Insider. It's not gonna let me see it, dude. Yeah, hold on. Maybe Forbes will do it. Yeah, there we go. Like, what did the Arab Spring, the Me Too movement, France's Gilets Jaunes, YouTube influencers, and Hong Kong airports protests have in common? They represent the fast-changing face of power. Hey, Watson, how you doing, bud? Like, the power dynamic does have to shift. Like, it shifts as generations die, right? Like, that's something that no one really wants to discuss or take very seriously, that as the boomers die off, right, the power dynamic has to shift. But who are going to be the primary beneficiaries of that, right? Whoever the boomers were that were rich, they're going to pass their wealth down to their kids, right? So we're entrenching a aristocracy in the society now, right? And literally, like, the power dynamic will shift, but it will always shift towards wealth, right? It'll always go where the wealth goes. And stuff like this, right? Like articles like this, in my view, like, and I say this without having read it, of course, but like articles like this exist, in my view, to keep people's mind off of how power actually works, right? Yeah, I mean, but what's so amid this general hierarchy, young people are building new power dynamics in what researchers call a highly experimental and constantly evolving new power beta. Like, literally, they're observing the desperation of people clinging to a refuge that has been cast aside from the capitalist death cult, and they're calling it power dynamics, right? That people aren't just dying silently and aren't accepting total abandonment, and look, they're doing things. So what are we calling it? Highly experimental and constantly evolving, a new power beta, right? They literally put you in the beta position too, right? So it's always gaslighting, it's always looking down, it's always shitting on, it's always putting people in a lower strata position 100% of the time, setting the expectation that you belong here. This is where you should be. We're not a group of equals just dealing with this temporal reality, right? There's a hierarchy. We're on top of it. You're at the bottom of it. And if you don't just want to be totally abandoned completely, we're going to call that a power beta is what we're going to do, right? Like the system is going full-blown mask-off psychotic. And it's getting really, really obvious. And just like, this is so clinical sounding. I mean, but that's just it. Like, the ruling class cannot, like physically doesn't understand how to respond to things emotionally. They no longer have those, like it doesn't exist, right? And so if you're trying to explain something to the only people who matter in the structure, right, which are wealthy people, you have to put it in clinical language like this. Because if you attempt to make a compassionate or empathetic argument, if you try to even say like, hey, everybody's like randomly generated, and like maybe try to live in someone else's shoes, like they're physically incapable of it. This is something I constantly have to reinforce, right? We have to reinforce because we are actually capable of emotions. Like we have compassion, we have empathy, we have the ability to look at other people's situations and perceive ourselves in those situations and think sympathetically of those people. That's an ability that we have, right? That the owners of the society don't have. They literally, even if they wanted to do what I just described, they couldn't. They wouldn't understand how to begin the process of doing it, right? Because to them, life is all about just dominating people in this hierarchy. And anybody who disagrees with you, you just censor them, cut them aside, get them out of your life. So you're just surrounded by a group of yes men whose only reason for existing in your purview is to enact whatever ridiculous, narcissistic, psychotic vision that comes out of your brain. Right? You want the world to look in this way, and so it will. Because no one can say no to you, because if they do say no, then you just get rid of them. Right? Like, and I have to reinforce this regularly because we constantly want to believe that these people are capable of empathy and compassion, that they're capable of these things. That like we find ourselves scratching our heads being like, wow, why are they acting that way? That seems so odd for a person who has compassion and empathy, the ability to feel and see themselves in other people. The wealthy do not have that. Like literally, they don't have it. They're not capable of it. And so when you find like you're reading this stuff and it's coming out clinically like this, like it's like sterile, you're looking into the mind of these guys, right? That if it doesn't make sense to them, if you can't describe it with this sterility, like all humanity just funneled out of it, all humanity removed from it. If you can't explain it like that, then they literally won't know what you're talking about, right? And that's the structure. That's where we're at. Yeah, it's kind of like how intellectual racists use scientific language to be racist. Yeah, like it's just finding new ways to maintain their own worldview, right? Gen Z and millennials would rather be unemployed than unhappy in a job. I mean, yeah. Like, hey, Eric, how you doing, bud? I mean, like, I saw that right here. Yeah, there it is. And of course it's behind a paywall. Like, no. Sorry, bud. Paywall. Can't do anything about it. John, did you, there's a UBI bill going through the Senate right now. I mean, there is a UBI in the Senate right now, but it literally, the bill is, let's pass legislation that says that we have to start talking about that we actually have to start talking about basic income. So it's like the precursor of the precursor of the precursor. Okay, hold on, Fabita. YouTube. 20 minutes is a long time, Famita. I don't think we're going to watch 20 minutes of a video. Why global supply chains may never be the same. I mean, oh, that's like that's a whole like 50-minute thing, dude. I might actually put that on tonight. Coming from the Wall Street Journal, no less. And also, I can't actually play this kind of content because they'll demonetize my video. I'll take a look at this, Fumita, and I'll come back around to you, okay? The Ben Burgess had a half-hour video completely destroying Dr. Jordan Peterson on Saturday. Hilariously awesome. I mean, he's become easy to destroy. Like, he's not... Like, Jordan Peterson's... Oh, for sure. I'll give it a... I'll probably put it on tonight. I'll put it on tonight. Maybe while I play Elden Ring. I'm stuck on a fire giant. Dude, this fire giant is so sweet. Anyway, I won't go down the Elden Ring thing. Look, Jordan Peterson, as soon as you actually understand what his position actually is, and it's really obvious how incoherent it is, right? Like, everybody should individualize their individualism, and the people who individualize their individualism are the ones who ascend the hierarchy of meritocracy, right? Like, that's Jordan Peterson's entire thing. Like, it takes people a long time to figure out that what he is saying is that, because he sucks at explaining it, and likely he's also completely not interested in being precise or actually understanding lots of subject matters. So when it comes to describing his own thing, it takes him like a book this thick and like 15 years of analysis for him to essentially start saying, every individual, it's the responsibility of every individual to individualize their own individualism. And if they do that individualism correctly, they should ascend the hierarchy of meritocracy, right? So the reason why this is a childish thing to say, right, and to believe as like a final a point is that it's no different than saying to someone, like, here's the analogy, right? So someone is thrown into the ocean, right? Like a whole group of people are thrown into the ocean, right? It makes sense that you would say, well, the best swimmers are the ones that are going to be able to tread water for the longest. Hey, how you doing? And the people who tread water the longest, right, are the ones who are the best, right? There's no question of why they're in the water. There's no question of maybe we should get them out of the water, right? Like there's none of that, right? They're just in the water, and then a giant yacht that is empty comes by, and instead of saying, okay, get everybody out of the water, let's get onto this yacht, right? The captain pulls out a megaphone and screams at them, swim harder, swim harder. And then when you watch people drown because they're lost in the ocean, you say, oh well, they should have swum harder, right? So Peterson's entire ideology falls apart the minute you recognize that they're like, his whole thing is that it's up to the individual to do their best. Great. But there are structures. And not only that, there are universal structures. Like, there are whole things. And this is kind of what I'm talking about when I say, like, the wealthy are not capable of empathy and compassion. Like, the idea that we should pull the yacht up and get people out of the water and into the empty yachts is something that he doesn't even consider as an option, right? That his concern is for the owner of the yacht. And it's like, hey, pissed off, how you doing, bud? Haven't seen you around, but I hope you're doing well. Oh, AE is your in real life friend. Here we go. Yep, the channel grows. The channel grows. Tell everybody I exist. Tell a friend. Tell your wives. Tell your girlfriends. Tell your boyfriends. Tell your dads and your moms. Tell the world. Tell the world. And we don't. And so Peterson's whole thing falls apart the minute you realize, like, oh, it's actually psychotic what he's saying. That we should literally allow people to drown in an ocean while we sit on empty yachts. Like, that is his position. And as soon as you recognize that's his position, when you listen to him, you realize, like, oh, this guy is just a rich guy that's lost the ability to have compassion. Like, it's simply not in his mindset or ethos, right? And he doesn't know how to begin the process of having compassion. It's been distilled out of him, right? And as soon as you are listening to someone, as soon as you listen to someone and start to take seriously when they've admitted to you and shown you fully that they're incapable of basic compassion, then you're going to lose your compassion and empathy too, right? Like we have seas and seas and seas of empty houses. Like they're just empty, right? And we have homeless people, as A is pointing out, right? Watched your vid camping out to the school video. Yeah, like like I've got that right here. Some students in Victoria are riding out the rental crisis by camping out full time. Like literally. Like literally we are getting to a point now, right? It really says we've hit an all-time low. Like these are our future doctors and lawyers and engineers, right? Do you think they're going to be able to do the job well while we get them to camp out? Do you think we're actually going to have like a good generation of smart kids? What do you mean it's the only precursor of the precursor? Is if it is just for show, why do they making a bill about making a law for $2,000 a month? No, like Eric, just because it's going through the Senate doesn't mean it's going to become a law, right? Like that it's got to go to the House, right? And then there's a whole process of the bill to become a law, like. And again, like the legislation as it's written, like isn't even basic income. Like it's let's make a plan for a basic income. That's the legislation. So like that, and that's like wide open, right? So like it's the exact same process in my view that like for basic income people, what that kind of stuff is for. Right? It's to make sure that you don't revolt. It's to make sure that you stay off the streets. It's to make sure that you don't surround the halls of power. Oh, there's legislation in the Senate. They're taking it seriously. They're doing something about it. 2 years pass. Nothing happens. Right? We start to build up momentum again to do what should be done, which is surround the halls of power and confront these psychopaths. Right? Because they're psychopaths. And then you wait the 2 years. Right? And then suddenly, oh, there's actually a bill in the House now. And so, okay, so that diffuses all the energy, right? Because the populace doesn't want to actually do what has to be done, which is surround the halls of power and confront the psychopath class. And then it dies in the House or it sits there and nothing happens, right? And then they create like a whole propaganda system comes out of this, and that diffuses a lot of power and energy. Right? And then it builds back up, it builds back up, it builds back up. And then, suddenly we're pushing the legislation through. We're pushing it through. It's hyper means tested. It's for $200 a month. You got to sign a bunch of paperwork and legislation every month. You got to prove that you're looking for work, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that they'll attach to it. And yeah, like UBI is a bourgeoisie ruling class con anyway. Yeah, like it does, like, I am still in favor of a basic income. I still think that it is like, if you have a wound, a Band-Aid is not a bad idea. Is the Band-Aid going to be the solution? No. But and in my view, like the fact that they haven't they passed a basic income with the CERB and then dismantled it. So that tells you the mindset of these people, right? That they view these kinds of things just as tools for them to manipulate a populace with. I like to think of the billionaire class as apoptosis, programmed cell death personified. I mean, there is something about that. Like, I mean, what do these guys think they're achieving? Right? Like, what do they think they're actually managing to do? Like, when they die, all of their toys, like, don't come with them, right? Like, none of that happens. Like, we are looking at a class of citizen that genuinely does not care about what happens after they die. Like, they are just living their own life, surrounding themselves. Like, take a look at Jeff Bezos. Like, he's shooting himself into space, just doing this, like, gallivanting joyriding, big giant super yachts, all this kind of stuff. And he genuinely doesn't care. Like, if he dies and then the whole place burns down because of the actions that he does, he simply doesn't care, right? And and moreover, he's not capable of caring. Like, that's the big thing that we've got to, like, really come to terms with these guys. They're not capable of caring. That when they complain, it's like a 2-year-old crying because they don't get a 4th lollipop, right? Like, it's that kind of thing. And because that's where their brain is, and it never developed past that. Apoptosis is the process through which cells in living bodies die for various reasons. Yeah, billionaires are also trying to murder all of us. Yeah. Like, I saw, I get on TikTok every so often, right? And I was flipping through, and somebody, like, really just pointed out, like, hey, here's something that we've actually proven. It's completely factual. We know it exists. It is real. That there was an island where rich people went to go have sex with children, and the people who were going to that island were the same people who were running the world. Like, that's a fact that you can't dispute. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal revealed there's a pedophile sex island where Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, like, at the very least, went to, among many other rich billionaires. And we're all just supposed to be like, yeah, billionaires are capable of empathy and compassion. No, they're not. Like, it's over, right? Like, we are talking about, like, a psychotic, evil death cult. Like, and they genuinely do not care about issues like climate change, about this kind of stuff, right? Massive social protests erupt in Sri Lanka, a critical development in the global class struggle. Yeah. I mean, you're going to see more and more of that kind of stuff. Because, honestly, like, the thing that blows me away about these students, like the students in Victoria riding out the rental crisis, camping out full time, why are these kids going to school, man? I don't get it. Like, why are they investing? And have a good one, A. Good to see you. Thanks for popping in. Why are they spending any amount of time going to school? To what? To, like, invest in this system that's going to explode? Like, it seems like, to me, if you're a student, like, if you're under the age of, like, 25, the only thing that makes any sense whatsoever is to be organizing mass protests and mass strikes and mass walkouts. Like, you've got to be as disruptive as possible at this point. Like, and I'm dead serious. I'm talking about, like, 12-year-olds in their, like, what is that? Is that grade 8? In, like, their grade 8 schoolrooms, just refusing to participate in this madness. Because it is madness. Like, what we're doing, it's beyond madness. Like, it's a deep, deep, deep psychosis, right? We are absolutely abandoning huge sections of our own populace, and ultimately abandoning our own children. And here it is. Like, here it is. Like, straight up, kids living in vans, kids living, like, and you just know that, like, the Jordan Peterson-brained types people will be like, there they are, bootstrapping their way, pulling themselves up, like, while we're literally putting a hand on their face and, like, pushing them under the water. Like, it's shocking, man. But let's just assume for a second it does make it into law. Where does the bill say that we should simply make a plan for a UBI? The way I understood his plan is that it was meant to get, like, Eric, can you tell me what bill you're referring to? Like, Bill C-48? Like, Bill what? Because, like, my understanding of what's going on in the Senate is that they have a bill before them that literally is just a bill to say to the government, you have to actually make a UBI plan. But that's what it is, right? And if you can have me search something else, and the best way to do that is to just be like, this is the bill, and we'll take a look at the bill. But even then, right? Even then, like, the entire reason of a basic income is just to keep power in the hands of the capitalist class, right? You talk about us being abandoned by sociopaths. Why does there seem to be a tendency for people to be governed by sociopaths? We are an insipid species. I don't think that is like that's a like part of the issue of ruling, right? Like of building civilization, right? Part of the issue that we are faced with is that there is a hierarchical aspect to it. Ultimately, that you end up with like a king or a chieftain, right? There's someone with some kind of special authority or special power. And we acknowledge that you kind of do need to have these sorts of people to be able to be agile, right? Like you can't ask like even 1,000 people to respond to what's going on in the world when like over and over and over and over and over again, because it's all they'd ever do, right? And where it goes wrong is when the wealth concentrates so badly that the ruling class no longer lives the same life that that of the people that they rule. That's where it goes badly, right? That when you see, and there are societies that like there are societies where the ruling class lives the same kind of life and kind of a humble existence that the of the people they rule over. It does it does exist. But we are in such a desperate problem right now because like this is where it gets really insipid in my view. Like the wealthy today have more wealth than like the ancient pharaohs did. But at least the ancient pharaohs were building cool shit. Like at least they built shit that like lasted and stood the test of time that we still have. And they were like doing really cool stuff with they were doing really, really cool stuff with mathematics, astronomy. Like they were doing all kinds of really wild and wonky stuff that's so advanced that the overt xenophobic racists in the United States are being like, it had to have been aliens. Couldn't have been brown people. Nope, couldn't have been brown people. Had to be aliens, right? So, but like we're not doing any of that. Like Bezos is shooting rockets into space, building these stupid yachts, right? Like it's as childish as it can be. Bill S233. This bill was defeated at second reading in the House of Commons. Oh wait, my bad. Bill S. An act to develop a national framework for a guaranteed livable income. The enactment requires the Minister of Finance to develop a national framework to provide all persons over the age of 17 in Canada with access. So literally, the bill enacts a law that requires the Minister of Finance to develop a national framework to provide all persons over the age, yada, 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 right? So the bill itself is not a basic income, right? The bill is just a bill that says you have to develop a national framework to provide all persons over the age with Canada to access to a guaranteed livable basic income. And so there's, exactly, and it's vague on purpose, right? It's vague on purpose. It's literally the beginning of the beginning, right? It's the bottom of the bottom, right? Like it's not the bottom of the barrel, it's the bottom of the bottom of the barrel, right? Like it's they haven't even built the barrel, right? Like it's literally dusting off the shelf to put the barrel on. Like that's the level that we're talking about here. And this means that you can do anything with it. So we pass this legislation that requires the Minister of Finance to develop a national framework to provide a basic income. Oh, okay. So we'll create $200 a month. We'll give it out to people. We'll force it to be extremely means tested, so it can only go to people who are, let's say, who are working, right, for a capitalist institution, right? You've got to prove that you're making a certain amount of money in the first place by selling your labor. And then we'll also make you go through like this whole checklist. And then there'll be like, you can only, and what we'll do is we'll put it all on this card that you can only buy certain things with, right? Like that's the kind of stuff that's going to happen with this sort of legislation, right? Like, these politicians are not simply going to say, "Oh yeah, people should have basic income." Like, so we'll just insert $2,000 into people's bank accounts every month, right? That is not what's going to happen. Like, it's not going to go down that way, and this legislation doesn't force them to do anything, right? Like, they literally can attain this. They can like check the box and be like, "We did it," by like. By saying like, yeah, we'll provide you $500 a month if you let a social worker come in and make sure that you adhere to the guidelines set by the government. You've got to put yourself into a make work program. Like, you've got to show that you're available for work all the time. We're gonna make you spend like 15 hours a week filling out paperwork. Like that like literally that's the kind of stuff that they will do. Right? Because the system is designed to be, like, these people are incompetent psychopaths, right? So the idea that people should just be able to live and exist in the world is an abhorrence to a psychopath, right? Egypt had the first strike due to a lack of PPE. Can anyone guess what the PPE was? Eyeliner. What? Personal protective eyeliner? How is eyeliner personal and protective gear? Senators overwhelmed by emails, calls pushing conspiracy theories about basic income legislation. Yeah, we took a look at that video the other day, Branwyn, and it was really interesting to see. Like, I'm glad that she addressed it. I'm glad that they were talking about it. But then they immediately, what was so funny about that video to me is that they immediately started to talk about Russian influence. Like, immediately. The question period in the Senate immediately became about, well, how much is Russia influencing all of this? Like, as if the billionaire class that exists in our society isn't far more influential. Like, as if Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have like a billion times more influence in the social media networks than fucking Russia. As if Elon Musk, who is now the largest investor in Twitter, as if he doesn't have more influence in the conversation than fucking Putin. Like, it's so fucking, like, we're so stupid with this kind of bullshit. Like, oh, there are Russian bots and even if there are, like, even if they do exist, do you think that they're more influential and powerful than fucking the owners of the social media sites? Like, and the very fact that the Senate isn't like acknowledging that, like, yeah, the people who own the social media sites, the people who actually own and operate and run them, are far more influential, are far more responsible, and are far more powerful than fucking like a Russian troll bot farm. Like, Get the fuck out of here with this shit. Like, this is exactly the brain rot that I'm talking about. And the reason why, like, senators can read this and be like, we're receiving a lot of conspiracies and we got to fight back against this by shaking our fist at Putin. Like, shut up. Maybe start talking about the idea that privatization is a failed idea. That, like, our information system being owned by 6 psychopaths is probably a bad idea, right? Like, but no, none of that hits the Senate. None of that matters, right? So get fucked us. If I have to hear one more time, one more conservative ask where money comes from, I don't hear that very much anymore, because like this pandemic period really showed, like the conservatives being like, how are you going to pay for that are morons, like literal morons. Like they don't know anything. They don't care to know anything. They're asking the question not to have it genuinely answered. They're just asking the question to infuriate the conversation. And like, if you actually answer it, they'll literally just go like, probably not though, and walk away because they're so stupid. Like, where does the money come from? The government literally creates money. Like, money just exists as like an intangible asset, right? So you create the money, you find dead pools of money in your society, of which there are plenty. Just take a look at the capitalist class, and eliminate the dead pools of money, right? Like, that's how you actually balance this stuff out. And some kind of redistributive model is going to have to happen given how stupid everything has gotten, right? Both UBI bills will get voted down before third reading by smirking liberals. Yeah, that's exactly right. I had a lovely debate with my uncle over Elon Musk where I called him a parasite and he didn't start from nothing. He basically said the whole myth that he started out of nothing. Yeah, remember, we have infinite money for wars, but don't have money to help the poor and the needy. Yeah, like, we can go create more poverty elsewhere with our infinite military budget, but if we actually want to resolve the poverty at home and not inflict ourselves on the rest of the world, like, one of the things, where is this? Yeah. Let's do a quick our place update. They've quadrupled the size of this canvas. Here's the most fascinating part of this, if you ask me. Like, this is the American flag. I've seen a lot of these digital canvases pop up from time to time on sites like Reddit and all this. The American flag is always dead center and it's always massive. It's like always the most prominent feature on the canvas, 100% of the time. The American flag has been like relegated to this back corner, right? After being literally wiped out. It used to be over here, right? This is where it was before and it got wiped out, right? The Canadian flag actually forming, finally, right? You can see the amount of action on it. You can see the amount of trolling that's hitting the Canadian flag, right? And it's very difficult for me to come to any conclusion other than, like, people hate us. Like, people fucking hate us. Like, people are spending a lot of effort and a lot of time and doing a lot of work in order to ensure that the United States and Canada are shit on and are just seen as bullshit, because we are. Like, oh, you mean going around the globe, destroying everybody, sanctioning everybody, and while simultaneously acting like we're worth a damn, doesn't make you popular? Who the fuck knew, right? Like, we're very, very thick. We're very, very thick with this shit. And, like, housing can't both be a human right and a profitable asset. Like, yeah. Andrea Horvath refuses to address homelessness and basic income for struggling Canadians. She will lose big. Yeah, I think that's right. Like, people want to see... basically, everybody has to be a radical now, right? Like, there's no such thing as a moderate, right? There's, like, no such thing as a moderate anymore. That if you're a moderate, you're just a loser. Nobody wants to listen to you. So you're either, like, radically evil... right? Let's destroy the place. Let's siphon as much resources away from the citizens as we can. Stuff the pockets of the billionaire class even further. Abandon the elderly. Abandon the poor. Abandon everybody. Grind set. Like, I'm working 60 hours a week and you should too. Like, that kind of radical evil, right? And so you're on that side of the equation. And that's the conservatives, the liberals, and much of the NDP now. Right? Or you're taking the position that all of this is bullshit. Like, none of this counts for shit. Right? And that's the vast majority of the populace, the majority of which don't vote because they're unrepresented. Right? And if a party were to actually start to show up that would challenge any of this in a meaningful way, it would just be destroyed. Right? That the system itself is designed to destroy these sorts of things. And if they can't actually destroy you through finances or legislatively or any of that kind of stuff, they'll just send goons to your house and kill you. Like, it is at that point. Like, we're here. Like, it's happening. Like, and the system of electoral politics has failed completely. and it can't be reformed, and it's not going to yield any results. So we're looking at a radical evil establishment that has thrown its chips in with a pedophilic, psychopathic elite. Like that's where we're at. And someone like Andrea Horvath, with her like Jiminy Jilliker's way of being, right? I actually think I have a video here. Is this it? Where is this video? I had a video of her actually. That's that's a different thing. Yeah, here you go.
You know, we all know that this pandemic has been painful and difficult for so many. But when we finally leave it in the rearview mirror for good, and I hope that time is very soon, we can't go back to the way things used to be. Right? When we look at the problems we faced in this pandemic, all of them stretch back years and years. They didn't start with COVID. They didn't even start with Doug Ford and his callous cuts and terrible choices. Even now, it's impossible to overstate just how deeply Mike Harris and his conservatives fractured the public services that we all depend on. And then with 15 years to fix the mess, Stephen Del Duca's Liberals failed. Instead, they brought us hallway medicine, more privatization, and worse seniors' care. Ballooning class sizes and crumbling schools. The gas plant scandal, the sell-off of Hydro One, and soaring costs for everything from childcare to housing to hydro, all while they kept wages low. Remember that? Remember that? What a terrible record. Mr. Del Duca and his Liberals, they talked a great game. But for 15 years, they just kept letting folks down. Then, just when we thought we could turn the page, Ontarians were hit with a painful double whammy of Doug Ford and the pandemic. We all know Doug Ford was cutting before the pandemic, laying off 10,000 education workers and slashing everything from public health to support for kids with autism to efforts to fight the climate crisis. That's what he was doing. And then during the pandemic, as local businesses and working folks struggled to stay afloat, our healthcare system buckled, our schools were in peril, and long-term care completely collapsed. Doug Ford refused to invest. He kept cutting, and people paid the price. And make no mistake, when the pandemic's over, he's gonna keep on cutting. Friends, Doug Ford has got to go. He's got to go. Now I want to take a moment, just a minute, to speak directly to people who maybe haven't voted NDP in the past. Maybe you've weighed your options last time and decided to vote Liberal to keep the Conservatives out. This time, things are different. Voting NDP is the way to defeat Doug Ford. That's the way. And so I'm going to be blunt. I'll be blunt. I need your vote. The NDP is as little as 10 seats away from forming a government that will unseat Doug Ford. Now, I want to repeat that. We're as little as 10 seats away from forming a government that will unseat Doug Ford.
But what are the NDP actually genuinely offering? Really? It really all does come down to, make sure you show up to work on time, right? That's really what the NDP, Sure, we'll offer you this one service over here. Sure, we're going to shit on the legacy of the liberals and conservatives. Of course we are. But, like, what are they actually putting on the table? What are they actually offering? Right? And I just see them, like, scattershotting stuff. I think the reason why they can't get support from the people is because people don't think they're serious. Right? Like, they're not actually pledging, like, a serious... Yeah, exactly. Perhaps talk about issues facing the working class instead of this. Like, it's... How about talk about housing? How about talk about, like instead of turning on the enemy and pointing out what the enemy has done wrong, how about saying what you want to do and what you want to do right? Like, I've seen Andrea Horwath tweet out that she's, like, interested in rent control, interested in this kind of stuff, but, like, it's tepid. It's always extremely tepid, and her campaign feels tepid. The support around her feels tepid, and it, like, she's going to be defeated by probably one of the worst premiers in Canadian history. And what's astounding to me is that someone like Ford actually gets support. Like, literally, he is destroying this province in major and serious ways. Like, major, serious ways. And we're going to give him another term for it. There does come a point where you really do got to start asking, like, is there what's wrong with us? What's wrong with us as individuals? And the truth is that the people who are voting, yeah, Andrea Horwath will be our Hillary Clinton, yeah. The people who are investing in Doug Ford are investing in a fantasy, right? Like, the problem is government. Let's just get rid of the government, and then suddenly everything's going to collapse and nothing's going to work. And everybody's going to be poor, and people will be like, oh, I wonder what happened. Like, what do you think happened? You voted to destroy it, and you did. Like, that's really what it comes down to. Like, we're dealing with a form of insanity at this point. Like, there's no other way to describe it. Like, and you can sit down and you can say to these conservatives, like, how do you think this is actually going to work? And they don't know, right? They don't understand. They don't even understand what their own people are doing, right? Like, they don't understand what Doug Ford is doing. And they genuinely think, like, I've talked to conservative types who think they're the good guys when they're, like, vampiric demons, obviously. And now we're just getting to a point where censorship is the day, right? Like, so you can't even have the conversation. So the ghouls are literally just going to come into their own little place and be ghouls and vampires with each other, right? And then anybody else is going to form up. And like, the people who are holding up the Vanguard banner and, like, trying to go in there and slay them are people like this. You can't have a leftist movement on stolen land. Yeah, Buckabeer crowd has way more representation than the entire NDP party. Well, and it looks to me like the Buckabeer crowd is basically just like, let's destroy the place. Like, that's what they're cheering for, is the wholesale destruction of the society. And their ideology is based entirely in a fantasy, right? Just this fantasy that says, if you can't keep up, like, if you can't swim hard enough, then you deserve to drown, right? Like, it's very demonic. Like, it's a demonic ideology. Only one person in 10 has any sense, but the other 9 have a vote. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I've interacted with these conservatives enough to learn that, like, these people suck. Like, they suck. They're like, I have literally seen their kids pointing and laughing and making fun of and mocking disabled people while they, the adults, grin stupidly like, oh, what am I even looking at here? Like, they are fine watching their children make fun of disabled people. I've seen it. This is the level of deplorableness that we're talking about. This is the despicable nature of the conservative death cult. Let's pick the number. Let's do it. I'm going with a 5. I'm feeling a 5.
Here we go for today's number. It's April 4, 2022. 10 balls. Each ball has a number. Numbers 1 through 10.
2 threes, a 2, always 5.
Swirl.
Lonnie, we're in it together.
Numbers.
2 8s. Oh, 3 8s. Woo, big. If it's an 8, that's a big
Pick
win.
a number.
Here we go.
Today's number is
And
3.
we got Brand winning oddity. Ding, 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 ding. NDM. 3 for 3. There you go. 3 for 3. That's nice. 3 people. The number 3. All the 3 threes. Exactly. Perfect. Go do the thing that you've always known you wanted to do, right? Pursue that thing. Go ask them out. Take the risk. Take the plunge. The worst thing that can happen is you fail. That's it. No, it's not a fix. How dare you, sir? How dare you? This is an honest place with an honest draw. Thank you very much. And you know it's got to be a fix, though, because the stakes are so high, right? That you get to walk away with the energy of David Lynch. Why wouldn't you want to try to fix that kind of thing? Yeah. I just can't get over how little Canadians expect of their government and expect of their leaders. That to me is, I think, the weirdest part about this. That everyone essentially assumes that your life is supposed to be selling yourself to this death cult, and that it's about the suffering. Like, that seems to be just like a blanket truth across the board. That if you're not selling yourself to this capitalist system, then you're not really alive and you're not really contributing positively, right? Like, yeah, the federal budget's going to be interesting. We'll go through it. Like, I am expecting... So, part of the reason why the NDP are so weak now is because they're no longer a socialist party, right? They're no longer a leftist party. They're a liberal party. And the Overton window has gone so far to the right that you essentially have... the liberals are now the NDP. The... conservatives are now the liberals, and the Conservative Party is just fascist. Like, straight up, like, let's destroy this place. We want nothing more than the wholesale destruction of the society, right? And so when you've got like 30% of the populace demanding that the society be torn apart and blown up, and the ruling class essentially is trying to just make sure it stabilizes, so they're conservatives. And then you have an NDP, which is like, well, we could get our teeth cleaned in the middle of it, right? Like, that's basically the NDP's position. Sure, you'll be homeless. Sure, you won't be able to afford food. Sure, you'll have to take on yet another job, right? But we'll get your teeth cleaned for you, right? Yeah, it's what happens when class consciousness is deliberately educated out of people, and people now think the class interests of the ruling class are good for the working class. Well, and one thing that is very difficult for me to ignore is that the identity politics and the hyper-focusing on the identity politics has manifested itself into the way that the parties have been structured. Right? That they're not actually having conversations about class issues, about material things. They're having conversations about identity issues, right? So what do you end up with? You end up with a conservative party that's mainly white, right? When you end up with a liberal party that has a degree of diversity, and then you end up with an NDP that's majority minority groups, right? And this is considered politics, and nobody is actually saying like, oh, we've been divided along these racial positions and divided ourselves and our society based on this subject of race. But the actual issue that's at play is that we all sell ourselves to a literal death cult that's actually structured to destroy us all, right? We just don't even talk about it or take it seriously at all. Social democracy is the least reactionary form of liberalism. And social democracy can only exist in the when there is like revolutionary forces going on, right? People think that you build social democracies, right? That social democracies like grow out of democracy, and you just need to vote for it, right? That's not how the ruling class actually works, right? You end up with social democracy. Social democracy is a concession by the ruling class, that they're choosing that in the face of a revolutionary force, they'll concede a certain degree of power, and that's thought of as social democracy. When what we have to be doing, and history bears this out, like it's an absolute truism, like we've got to get rid of these capitalists. Like they've gone psychotic, they've detached from reality completely. And they are going to murder us. Like it's going to be a huge problem. Like I don't know how often I need to say this. Like we cannot negotiate with the sun, right? That there is no technological solution. If the sun, if we reach a point where the sun just starts burning this place down, it doesn't matter if you're driving an electric vehicle. It doesn't matter if you've got an air conditioner. Doesn't matter if your power plants are like carbon neutral or whatever, right? None of that matters, right? That if we tip it over too far and we break the rules too much, right? The sun will burn this place down, like, and it's going to happen very quickly. And if we don't actually stop what we're doing and stop pretending like these I've got an article here that's all about like jerking off the idea of like, yeah, electric vehicles, like, and don't get me wrong, like we should be reporting on the electric vehicle switchover, like that's real, but like, you know what would actually matter? You know what would actually help is if we just stopped. Like if we just stopped driving to these shitty jobs that don't need to be done in order to do these ridiculous tasks that are pointless. Like it's all pointless, right? Like we're just generating fake money for psychos. Like that's what we're doing. And when the sun starts burning down our cities, right? Like it's not going to give a shit. It's not going to be like, well, you're a hard worker, right? Like, oh, well, they did like, they meant well. Like none of that's going to fucking matter. Like, and I just eventually get to a point where I'm just like, what's it going to take? What's it going to take for Canadians to actually go like, yeah, maybe we should stop trying to negotiate with the sun? Because that's what we're doing. We're attempting to negotiate with the sun. And like, it's going to burn the place down. And it's not going to care. And like, when it starts happening, like the planet is just going to be like, yep, like this is how it goes, guys. Like there are rules, right? And like once the place gets scoured, right, the earth will just like go into a stasis period the way it has in the past, right? And then it'll probably try again, right? And maybe next time actually get some intelligent life in this thing, right? Because like we're not intelligent. Like we're resourceful, we're creative. Oh, thank you, Pissed Off. I appreciate the donation. I appreciate good opportunity to say to all of you, like, share, subscribe, think about donating, right? Get into the Patreon, all that kind of stuff. Most importantly, tell someone I exist. For God's sakes, tell someone I exist. Because, like, I don't know why we actually have to say out loud that it's bad if the place burns down, right? Like, why does this need to be said out loud? Why do we even need to have this in the conversation? Like, it's bad if the place burns down, and the people who are trying to burn the place down should go to jail, right? Like, it's a pretty straightforward. Yeah, everyone having a personal vehicle, no matter what kind, is not sustainable. I mean, that's the part that nobody actually discusses. Like, an electric vehicle is like 5 times the amount of copper, right? So we don't have that much copper. Like, we just don't have the copper. And so what is that going to do? It's going to mean that we're going to mine more copper. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to create more carbon, right? Like, we're not going to... been sharing your videos on various pages, Facebook pages I'm on. They do get a response. Oh, I appreciate that, Watson. That's kind of you. That's really nice. Last week, my church was having its general conference. For those who don't know, the LDS Church have a bi-yearly conferences where the church leadership talks to the people. This conference, there was a speaker talk briefly about pollution, but the main message is individualism, personal responsibility. Yeah, just complete trash. Like, the sun isn't going to give a shit about your personal individual and your personal responsibility. Like, it's not going to give a shit about it at all. Like, it's going to look at that, and like, if the sun was a person, it would be like, that's cute. Like, oh, that's a cute idea, right? And then it's going to burn your house down, because go fuck yourself, right? Like, Hatshepsut knew the power of the sun and how it could be used to punish people into working longer by buying obelisks as a factory sundial. Like, the absurdism of all of this. Like, the electric vehicle thing, along with the carbon capture thing, is literally just salesmanship. It's just straight up just like, let's sell people a solution to a problem we're creating. And the solution itself doesn't solve the problem. Like, emissions are going to continue going up. That's all that's what it comes down to. Like, they're not going to go lower, they're going to continue going up. Because these people are psychopaths. That they're just trying to convince you that they care. Like, that's it. We're overdue for a sunspot shutdown of the power grids. I mean, we know the Texas power grid is going to go down eventually, right? Like, and it's going to go down on a permanent level. I thought the obelisk was to imitate on a permanent basis the erection of the pharaoh. Yeah. Why do we need a 50-foot pickup? Really? Yeah. Like, all of this. Yeah, recycling is mostly a scam. Yeah, part of the personal responsibility push. Yeah, it's gaslighting. Like, this is how it must be discussed, right? It's gaslighting. That the death cult is gaslighting us and saying that the real problem is you, right? It's certainly not the billionaire class that is overwhelmingly responsible for the vast majority of pollution, right? It's certainly not the war machine, right? It's certainly not the industrialized war machine that is responsible for these things. It's certainly not massive institutional power, right? No, the issue is, a single mom who, instead of putting plastic in the blue bin, is putting it in the garbage, right? That's absolutely the case. Yeah, watch George Carlin on Save the Planet. Yeah, no, we're not trying to save the planet. We're trying to save ourselves, right? The planet will be fine. Carlin was absolutely right about this. Right, and it's just gonna throw us off like fleas. Like, it doesn't care, like, and it's just, and once it tries again, maybe it'll be like, okay, like this next time, let's get some intelligent life. Like, that was fun. Like, that was creative. There was a lot of creativity there, right? Humanity has a lot of resourceful creativity and does a lot of stuff, and it's very fun. Right? I think we're very fun people, right? Like, that humans, like, if I was an alien species looking at what humans were doing, I'd be like, what fun, right? But we're not intelligent. Like, there are parts of us that are attempting to become intelligent, I think. Like, I look at what China is doing, right? And I'm just like, oh, there's a group of humans that are attempting to be intelligent, right? But we're not even trying. Like, we're straight up, like, we actually despise intellectualism in this society. Like, this culture is as anti-intellectual as you can get. Like, and like the issue of climate change alone should convince you that that's the case, right? Oh yeah, the planet isn't bothered. Human time is over, right? Like and I mean we had our shot, right? Like we had our shot, and the shot is like there are extremely basic rules to follow, right? I don't like when MLs get doomer and say the system will collapse. Any hiccup is when it's planned, and worse capitalism gets is the numbers get more and more ridiculous. It doesn't just collapse. I mean, it's going to. In my view, capitalism is already collapsed. Like we don't live in a capitalist system. This is much closer to a feudal system. Like the entire structure is held up completely by government spending at this point. And who owns the government? Well, the ownership class. So the owners own the government, which then in turn use subsidies in order to maintain the power of the powerful people who own the government. Like, it's a tight little circle, and in no way is it remotely resembling anything you could even consider capitalistic, right? That it's the end of capitalism, and the end of capitalism is just a return to feudalism. And so that, like, the system has already collapsed. Like, you can't just, like, start a small business and, like, try to, like, make, like, none of that's real. And, like, that's why there are all these articles that are coming out that somebody had me read earlier on. We're just like, wow, look at the Gen Z and the millennials. They're really building up, like, a secondary economy and, like, all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, because there's literally nothing else we can do. Like, these guys are taking a look at our desperation as we're like desperately attempting to cobble together something that actually pays our bills, and calling it like a sharing economy or a secondary economy or some cute little name they can give it to try to pretend like it isn't just us dealing with the full scale abandonment of this death cult that's taken control. Yeah, the recycling symbol was co-opted by the plastics industry. The symbol with a number in the middle is not recycling symbol, but used to identify plastics. Yeah, they did this to confuse the symbols, of course. No, of course. And, like, I've read articles that they're just like, yeah, they take the recycling from the recycling bins and they just bring them to the garbage factory, right? They just, like, toss it in the bin anyway. That it's all just performative, right? And, like, and none of it is actually resulting in a reduction of anything. Like, that's exactly the way our system operates. That it's just like create the veneer of something, right? Really go out of your way to like work as hard as possible to create the perception. So like garbage bin, recycling bin. Here are the rules. Make sure that you do this. It's very important. And then both of those bins get dumped into the fucking dump anyway, right? Like nobody's like sorting the recycling. Like that's not what's going on. Grimes said on Hassan's show that America should invade Canada. Oh yeah, fantastic. Hey Compton, how you doing, bud? It's not collapsed. Collapse would mean you don't have electricity and you'd have roving groups of people. We're just seeing a planned event by people with money being prioritized. Oh, you're talking about like a full scale like systems collapse, like just like straight up like there isn't even electricity, right? Like, but like I would argue that a feudal society, right? Like a feudal society is going to have electricity, right? Like if the medieval kings had electricity, they would have it and use it. Like it's like I think you and I are just misunderstanding one another. That like I'm talking about the collapse of capitalism and you're talking about the collapse of civilization. That's the difference. Like we have not had a civilization collapsing event yet. That's true, right? Although it's very difficult for me to believe that the Texas power grid isn't going to go down, right? Like it keeps going down, and they're not repairing it. They're not really doing anything. It's like shoestrings. Here's a question for you, John. When was a time that the capitalist has never used subsidies? As far as I know, the capitalists has always used subsidies to make themselves more powerful. Yeah, I mean, there's always been a degree of subsidization that exists within the system. And I mean, in a lot of sense, I mean, this is why capitalism doesn't actually work, is because you've got to have subsidies. Like, you want to subsidize your farmers, for example. Like, you want those guys to be able to not, like, you want food to be produced. And the best way to do that is to ensure that they have some kind of subsidization to make sure that it happens, right? Yeah, it was better being a peasant under the feudal system. Only had to work for 3 months and the rest of the time was mine. Good times. Well, I mean, 3 months might be a bit aggressively low, but there is pretty strong evidence, like anthropological studies and like research on medieval systems really are kind of like the comeback from it is like, yeah, like feudal serfs were like working for short periods of time, right? The planting season, and then, you know, you have to kind of tend to things, and then the harvest is the big one, right? And then there was like a festival season, and like, but everything was like much more chill than how it is now. And I genuinely think that if you said to like a feudal peasant, like, yeah, we industrialized our agricultural system, they would be like, oh, wow, so like, what do you do with all the free time you have? And then we go on to describe how nobody has any free time. We all spend our time doing grueling, moronic tasks for a system that's actually designed to burn the world down. Like they'd scratch their head and be like, so do you just not don't you have pitchforks? Like what like I don't understand. Like I genuinely think that like medieval peasantry, if the shit that was happening today was happening to medieval peasantry, they would have already like gone to places and burnt shit down. Like it already would have happened. We're just like completely detached from reality. Based on recent evidence, it is clear that many Canadians, whatever their political leanings, appear to lack basic understanding of the workings of our parliamentary democracy. Well, I mean, we're not taught. Like, there's no, like, class that you take in high school that's like, this is what your government is actually like. This is how you actually are part of your government. This is how it works, right? And if there is, it's like a one-day thing, right? You're not actually taught how to meaningfully interact with it. Eating lunch. Civilization has collapsed. They stopped making the Waltons. Oh, God, that's it. Yeah, that's it, bud. Yeah. Yeah, you're right about that. Stop calling it subsidies. It's. I think you meant corporate welfare here. But, like, that is what it is. Like, and in the meantime, like, here, I'm going to read this one out. Canada's spiraling cost of living crisis. The latest inflation shock is yet another confirmation of the need for militant social resistance in the post-pandemic period. I love that we are like terming this new period of time that we are in post-pandemic, right? It's the semantic language that we're using to get away with it's how we're dealing with the fact that we're a feudal society now. That instead of saying, like, we're in like a techno-feudal or a neo-feudal society, we're saying a post-pandemic society, right? Like, that's the language that we're using in order to cope. It's coping language, right? This is post-pandemic. You mean neo-feudal? Post-pandemic. Got it. As we are purportedly emerged from the pandemic, one of the immediate challenges that confronts us is a global cost of living crisis. There has been a sharp round of inflation, which, even if we optimistically imagine it will be rapidly contained, has already had a very serious impact on the living standards of masses of people. As the Food and Agriculture Organization reports, global food prices reached an all-time high in February. They have risen by an astounding 24.1% over the last year, and by nearly 4% in the last month. This is an absolutely devastating development for people in poor countries, where the effects of pandemic-induced economic scarring are already having a terrible impact. Even those of us in the richest countries, however, are facing a grim reckoning. According to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, consumer prices rose 3.5% last year, while wages rose just 2.3%. In that country, workers earning an average wage took an effective pay cut of $832 when the impact of inflation is taken into account. In the United Kingdom, workers' wage increases are being wiped out by the surge in prices. Moreover, next month, a new energy price cap could see costs for millions of households hiked by 50%. In the United States, despite an average wage increase of 3.3%, real wages are being pushed down by the highest rate of inflation in 40 years. Here in Canada, the annual rate of inflation has surpassed 5% for the first time in 30 years and has outpaced wage growth. A recent survey conducted by the Angus Reid Institute found that 70% of those they questioned were stressed about money, as the pressure of inflation weighs on their daily lives. Canadian household budgets are becoming squeezed from all angles as the price of goods rises, the report concluded. Just over half of the respondents indicated that an unexpected $1,000 bill would put an impossible strain on their finances. Rising housing, gasoline, and food prices are the key driving forces, and the impacts of this are being felt very unevenly. For example, the average rental price of an apartment in Vancouver has increased by an astounding 23% over the course of the last year. Supply shocks. If, as is plausibly argued, the present inflationary crisis is largely attributable to supply shocks caused by the economic disruption that has been generated by the pandemic, this may not be the good news that some suppose. Indeed, ruptures in the fragile supply chain, which was constructed along with the neoliberal reordering of the global workforce, may be considered another emerging feature of the multi-layered crisis of capitalism. First of all, the assumption that the impacts of the pandemic will now recede may well be decidedly premature. As the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, put it, contrary to expectations, COVID has not gone away with the arrival of vaccines. In fact, we are now headed once again into more COVID-related supply disruptions from China. The lingering effects of the pandemic are, however, but one part of a much wider problem. At the present, economic impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine are chief among these. When it comes to this new disruptive inflationary pressure, Goldman Sachs analyst Philip Hildebrand suggests that we are looking at a supply shock layered on top of a supply shock, and the nature of the new supply shock centered on energy suggests not only that inflation will move even higher and likely prove more persistent moving forward, but also that growth will take a hit. The inflationary pressures resulting from the Ukraine conflict will not be limited to energy costs, but will also produce serious consequences when it comes to food prices. In the poorer countries, this takes on the dimensions of a complete disaster, with the head of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, I think I did pretty well there, raising the possibility of major riots being triggered by the ensuing acute hardship. It is poor countries and poor people within poor countries that will suffer the most, she observed. Obviously, the intensifying climate crisis looms large when it comes to supply shocks and economic disruption. Global Trade Magazine, a publication that modestly describes itself as the authority for U.S. companies doing business globally, warns that the climate crisis means that transporting parts and products across the world will become an increasingly challenging and even dangerous task. It also very plausibly identifies climate change as the key threat to global supply chains. The worsening situation will cause problems that go well beyond the balance sheets of U.S. companies engaged in global trade, and it speaks to economic shocks and inflationary pressures stretching well into the future. As with any crisis of capitalism, the question of who will pay for it becomes a crucial issue. One potential supply chain disruption that the major employers would like to prevent is any effort by workers to defend their rights and living standards. Following a 48-hour work stoppage by Canadian Pacific Railway workers, calls have gone out for rail to be declared an essential service. We may be sure that the profit-driven fragility of the supply chain will be addressed to the least degree possible, but that any effort by workers to take advantage of the chokeholds that this creates will be met with loud employer demands to criminalize such actions. Class war. Capitalists, mainstream economists, and central banks have long put forward the claim that workers' wage demands fuel an inflationary spiral. It is hard to see how, in the present situation, workers are driving an inflationary process that they are unable to keep up with, but interest rate hikes are nevertheless being considered. To be sure, the faltering global recovery and the deep uncertainties it brings with it are raising doubts in high places about the risks of going too far, but the interest rate hawks are gaining ground. The use of this method by central banks is a standard weapon of class war, and even a modest set of increases would have serious adverse effects in this period of economic fragility. Workers and communities face the dire impact of the inflationary surge, with unions that are far weaker than they were during the spiraling inflation that marked the 70s. The struggle to win cost of living protections in collective agreements will be an uphill one, and a greatly increased proportion of the workforce is now subjected to low wage and precarious forms of employment. Income support systems are also far less robust than they were 40 or 50 years ago. The people in Ontario who live on wretched sub-poverty social assistance income have had their benefits frozen for the last 3 years. This was already a serious situation before the present cost of living crisis struck, but it is now an actual threat to survival. The recent death of a man in Barrie who perished in an uninsulated trailer attests to the inadequacy of the provincial government's social assistance rates, which force many recipients to choose between dangerous housing conditions and homelessness. A concentrated working class response is imperative in this situation. Certainly, bold demands around workers' rights, housing, and social provision must be made, but there is also going to have to be a determined social mobilization. In Britain, Unite General's Secretary Sharon Graham has indicated that her union will fight for wage increases that match real increases in the cost of living. Today's rise in inflation reflects a growing crisis in the cost of living for ordinary families. So workers' wages will have to at least match the inflation rate, because otherwise they will be facing a calamitous drop in their standard of living. Protests were recently held across the UK in an attempt to galvanize a movement to fight back in these conditions of crisis. We must follow suit here in Canada. The present inflationary shock is one more confirmation of the need for militant and powerful social resistance in the post-pandemic period. Working class people didn't cause the pandemic, nor did they provoke the crisis that are emerging in its wake. But to foil the attempts to impose the burden on us, we must be prepared to organize resistance in our workplaces and communities. Like, John Clark is a writer and retired organizer for the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty. Like, we're almost there with these sort of statements. We must prepare to organize resistance in our workplaces and communities. Like, we're not yet ready as critics, even in places like Canadian Dimension, right? We're not quite ready to say out loud what needs to be said, which is that this is a system of abandonment. That what we are organizing against isn't simply billionaires are being greedy and they're taking more of their share and all of that. It is an active system of structural abandonment. You're supposed to be abandoned. That's the point. The goal is to abandon you. And we literally need to start saying this out loud so that we understand that what's happening is not a mistake, right? That this is the result. This is the point. You're supposed to be abandoned. And when you struggle to deal with it, that's on you. You individualize your own individualism to individualize your individualism, right? Calling it feudalism as being too nice. At least they had a lot of socializing among people under feudalism, yeah. Well, and feudalism created you had like golden ages of theater and things like this under feudalism, right? Like all we get is just like this Marvel shit. That's what we get. It's just this Marvel dreck, right? Like the Shakespearean period happened in a feudal society, right? Like there was a reformation of the religious order that happened under feudalism. Like lots of interesting things happened in the feudal period. Like we're literally like, boy howdy, I can't wait to watch like Iron Man 53 or yet another Spider-Man reboot while just waiting for the place to burn down. Post-pandemic, talk about soft language and antiseptic. Meanwhile, the global south is beginning to revolt over food prices and scarcity. Yeah, and honestly, like what's happening in the global south, like everybody's turning to China. Like everybody's turning to China because like they're stabilizing this place. And if the choice is to, starve or to actually try to stabilize your economy. She makes working people poorer. That's how they balance out the economy, yeah. Stagflation of the 70s is back. Yeah, it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse than that, for sure. That's right. You have anime as well, yeah, but that's coming out of like Japan, right? That's not even us. You also had things like cholera and smallpox under feudalism. The plague. Let's never forget the plague, yeah. I'd argue that that's not a result of feudalism, though. That like we had pretty significant like penicillin. Like penicillin as a discovery, right? But we could be a feudal society with penicillin, right? So, and I don't think that it's like capitalism can take credit for inventing this shit. Like people figured this out. People I'm talking with about the current and upcoming class warfare either listen with interest or get pissed at me. Yeah, those are the two positions. You're basically just describing the electorate there. That you're either finding people who are actually listening in and who are actually being like, okay, something's gone wrong. I want to know what's going wrong. I want to know what solutions we can have. And then you have on the other side of it the death cult, right? Like capitalism is a death cult, right? And if you're invested in the death cult and you believe in the death cult and you've subserviated yourself to the death cult, then anybody who is critiquing the death cult, you need to get angry at and censor and shit on and dump on, right? And there really isn't a middle ground anymore. Like we are talking about like a Skeletor, Voldemort, like Palpatine, like Luciferian, like pick your villain, right? What villain in what story inspires you? Like, is it Voldemort? Like, what villain convinces you that there is evil and it exists in the world and it can exist in big structural empires and societies, right? Like Darth Vader, does it do it for you? Like when you think about the Empire in Star Wars, right? And how like galaxy spanning and how enormous this endeavor was, where there were like clones and like the stormtroopers and all of this crazy shit going on and the high level of technology and all of this. Like we can do that. We can have that here. Why can't we? Right? And like and it's here. Like this is the thing that I think people don't want to acknowledge or understand about Western society and America and Canada, that we are the empire. Like we are very dark and very evil. Like we do not operate. We only pretend to operate for the good of anybody. But like at the end of the day, our entire ethos is as dark and sinister and evil an ethos as you can find. we should destroy the planet and thereby the species so that the people who are currently alive can live a life where they have more wealth than the ancient pharaohs. Like, can you find a darker ideology? What's darker than this? Like, we are going to destroy the species so Jeff Bezos can fire rockets at space. Like, the only way it could get worse is if it really was like Sauron's army. Like, literally we were just going around like slaughtering one another. That's literally the only way this gets worse, right? Is if it's just like massive abandonment, huge famines, mass slaughter, right? Like, and that's what we do in other countries. Take a look at what we're doing to Afghanistan, right? Have a good one, Vaughn. Good to see you, bud. UK heating costs are up by 50%, inflation 10%, national insurance up. There will be a real hardship. Can't see a rollover acceptance. Yeah, I suspect that there's going to be like real major political changes that happen throughout Europe. That the Europeans are going to basically look at their current leadership and basically throw them over, right? I expect to see a lot of that. Here in Canada and the United States, it's essentially irrelevant, right? You vote for Capitalist Party A or Capitalist Party B, and that's essentially it. And now here in Canada, we have Capitalist Party C. But they're all just like, yeah, the system that's literally going to destroy us and burn the place down. Like, these systems are all fine, right? Like, it's become obvious that the political class in this country isn't trying to save the species. They're trying to save capitalism. That's what it's about. That if we were actually trying to save the species, we would be talking about demilitarization. We would be talking about simply telling people to stay home. Right? We would be talking very seriously about reducing our activity, about straight up just reducing our pollution, right? Like, we wouldn't be talking about this like free market thing. We wouldn't be talking about any of that. We would be saying, okay, the problem is that we are emitting carbon. What do we do to stop emitting carbon, right? Well, though I would argue that the number one way to stop emitting carbon would be to stop emitting carbon. Right? So look at what are your largest polluters, who are the people who are actually doing the polluting, and have them stop it. And you can determine if a certain degree of pollution is necessary or not. Like, we don't want people to freeze to death, right? That's certainly the truth. But take a look at here on the 401. You're telling me all of this car traffic is completely necessary? You're telling me that this is actually the way that we should structure it? I think you're out of your fucking mind. And we are. Like, we're out of our fucking minds. Like, tell all of these people to stay home, right? Just provide the housing, do rationing. We need to actually confront this as a war. We need to structure our economy into a war economy. There's no other way to do it, right? The free market system is not going to work because it's a system of chaos, right? It's literally what a death knight would say. Because in the mind of the capitalists, just letting the place burn down is an acceptable outcome, right? France may be falling into neo-fascism. Marine Le Pen is running neck and neck with Macron. My favorite is people say the problem isn't capitalism, but the government. If we have less government and let the capitalists do their own thing, then everything will be fine. Yeah, the doubling down on the death cult, right? Like, the whole idea of, oh, just less government. Well, you're basically just selling yourself more to the death cult then. You're basically just saying the structures of corporate power should be deeply entrenched in the society, and we should not have any system whatsoever to be able to counterbalance them or check them, right? So just do the thing that's failing harder is essentially the libertarian position. And yeah, that's libertarianism. Like, and of course, the libertarians all ignore that who owns the government, right? Well, the very people that you're saying we should sell ourselves to own the government. So if the problem was the government, then everything would be fine, right? Because the capitalists own the government, right? So the capitalists own the government and get the government to do what the capitalists want, but the problem is the government, so we'll get less government, and then the capitalists will be able to do what they want, even though they're literally already doing what they want because they own the government. Like this is literally what they are saying. And it really, really shows you how childish we are, right? Like I used to say stupid, but that's inaccurate, I think. Like it's childishness that we genuinely want to believe in this idea that fairies and wizards will just magically wave a wand and everything will be good, right? Like straight up they're saying, if we just get rid of the government, then happily ever after. And you don't need to discuss anything more. You don't need to it's a fairy tale what they are believing. And the more you dig into it and the more you look at it, the more you see that that's the case. And like it's an indefensible position. Like it's completely indefensible. Like if libertarianism worked, it already would be working. But it's bereft of even the most basic analysis. And the only way you can continue to believe it after doing even the most itsy bitsy basic analysis. And I'm talking about like as basic as play a game of Monopoly. Like that's how basic we're talking here. Like if you maintain your libertarianism after playing a single game of Monopoly, you're not different than like a fundamentalist Christian saying that Jesus Christ is coming back at any moment, right? You're not any different than a little kid saying Santa Claus gave me gifts, right? You're living in a fantasy world that is just absolutely marching the species into a furnace, right? Like it's incredible. Read The Last Ring Bearer. The Lord of the Rings is pure propaganda. I mean, I use The Lord of the Rings as an analogy for like that the ring of Sauron is capitalism, right? And that we had the opportunity to throw capitalism back into Mount Doom and be done with it. And instead we kept it we believe that we can use capitalism to our benefit without recognizing that capitalism is its own force that has its own rules and its own agendas. And that it's telling that when Frodo finally gets to the point where he has to throw the ring into Mount Doom, he doesn't, right? It corrupts even him in the end. But that the force that does manage to throw the ring in is the ring's most virulent defender, which is Golem, right? This twisted nightmare creature that capitalism has distorted is in the efforts to defend capitalism. Ultimately, the most virulent acolytes will be the ones responsible for its destruction. And I think that that's true. Like, there is going to be a force that comes out of the society that is going to be so repugnant and so repellent and so disgusting that the rest of the species, and it will become like on a human level, we as a people will say, we must be rid of this. It must occur. Will we do so in a timely manner? There's just too many people. Yeah, a little Malthusian there. Yeah, I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that at all. Like I don't think that overpopulation's not really an issue, honestly. Like there is going to be like a stabilization. Like there's a reason why we had a big spike up. And the big spike up happens because of penicillin and other our increase in medical understanding, right? And we were we were really trying to, like as a species, the survival strategy for the species was have as many kids as you possibly could, because you expected most of them to die before they got out of being a child, right? So you'd have 5 kids, 3 of them would die, right? That's what you expected. And then we entered this period of time where we figured out medicine well enough so that that was no longer the case. So you had one generation where they had 5 kids and all 5 of them survived. And you're like, oh. And so that spikes up your population pretty dramatically. But now people aren't really having that many kids anymore, because it turns out that if you know that there's a good chance that your kid is going to survive, well, then you only have a couple, right? Because you're not trying to have like a whole slew of these kinds of things. And then also you have like an increase in the expectation and the rights of women, and you have women's movements, right? And women, like at base, at the bottom of like what inspires women's movements and feminist movements and things like this is actually the reality that we're not in this survivalist mode any longer. That the rules that women were governed by for so long only make sense in a survivalist society. But as soon as the society exits this survivalist mode, right? Suddenly you have a whole bunch of people who have a whole bunch of time on their hands and are looking around being like, hey, we should be treated with the same validity as anybody else, right? Like, we are not property. We don't we refuse to be treated this way, right? And a lot of that, in my view, comes down to the reality that we had this big shift in how many kids survived, right? And so, sure, we had a big spike up, right? And there was a general increase, and especially as this started happening across the globe, right? Like in China, in India, in all of these places, right? Because medicine got to the point where, yeah, if you have a kid, there's a really high level chance that they're going to survive. So the Malthusians, right? The people who and the overpopulation people, they get into this tizzy because they think the line is just going to keep going like that. When in reality, like the line went like that, and now it's kind of going like this a little bit more. And in fact, we're actually going to, here in the West, we're going to go into a decline, right? And we're going into a decline for pretty obvious reasons. Nobody has the time or money to actually have kids. So even if you want to like have just 2 kids, which the national average is still something like, it used to be like 2.5. Now it's something like 2.1, and in some regions it's getting below 2. So we're starting to get out of replacement level, right? So that means that your society goes into a decline, right? Just in terms of population growth. And one of the worst things that I think has happened in the system of economics is that economists don't actually, like, they seem to think like something is more important than population. That like, yeah, even China's going into a decline. Well, China wants to go into a decline. Like China actually, like they fell for a bit of this Malthusian thinking, but I mean, for God's sakes, they've got 1.4 billion people. Like, and the one child policy alone is an attempt. Like, obviously they want to go into a decline. Like their concern was, how do we? They didn't believe that they could simultaneously industrialize and improve the quality of life for everybody while also having this incredible rapid growth. But that's because they too fell for this idea, right? Like they went through like Mao's Great Leap Forward, the industrialization of China. And during all of that, you have an increase in medicine. The same thing happens in the West. And so you have one generation who is used to the idea of you got to have like 5, 10 kids. Like you got to have as many kids as you can because most of them will die. And then suddenly you have this generation that's doing that, and all of them live. They all live, right? And so, and if you think that keeps happening, if you think that everybody is just going to have 5 to 10 kids, then yeah, like the Malthusian issue is a huge issue. But it doesn't manifest itself that way, right? Because once people understand, like, oh, like, I'm gonna have 2 kids, and those 2 kids are gonna survive, right? And having 3 kids made me realize that capitalism is hostile to social reproduction. Oh yeah, dude. Like what? Just like moms don't get paid. Like what? You don't need to know anything more than that, right? Like if you're a mother, you don't get paid. Like capitalism is inherently against childbirth and child rearing and all that kind of stuff, right? Like moms don't get paid. Like you don't need to know anything more than that. If a Christian has less than 10 children, they are just not doing their duty and perpetuating the faith. That feels very Catholic. I haven't encountered too many Christians that do follow along that line. Like, I mean, I'm sure you can find a couple. Like, I'm sure those people exist. Like, there's all kinds of wonky, weird people out there. But I think, like, generally speaking, yeah, and people are living longer. That's true. Yeah. I know a ton of Catholic families who are in extreme financial trouble because they have taken on 6 or more children. Yep, the Catholics. Every sperm is sacred. Yeah. Yeah, you know, well, and because some people actually do, like some religions, like this is, I don't want to open up the abortion can of worms, but it's tied up in that, right? Which is the idea that, like, you know, this place is sacred, that this is a holy place, that we are part of, like, God's creation, and that part of the to do honor to God and to really believe in the spirit of God is to create as many people as you possibly can to proliferate throughout the lands and all of this. Like it's all tied up in that, and it's just like, I don't know, like have kids. I don't know, it's fine. Like but it's not like. It's not really tied up in any kind of actual analysis of anything. And I do think that people, so much for original sin. I mean, the original sin was eating an apple in the Garden of Eden. So I wonder if industrialized farming had a role in that too. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. The industrialization of farming. And all of this happens like with enormous rapidity, right? Like people are more secure than they have been in a long time, for the moment. 14 years as a full-time pastor, I met a whole bunch of different types of people. There are plenty of evangelicals who feel like they have to perpetuate Christianity by having babies. Oh man, why? It's just wild to me, man. It's wild to me. Like the Christian types who say that abortion is evil, but then turn around and say that if you create systems of support for these people, then then that's bad too. It's just like, it's high level cruelty. Less family farms, less people needed to take care of the homestead. Yeah, that's right. Like you no longer view children as a personal workforce, right? People are no longer part of your workforce. And everyone has an apple now. Hold on, I just got to turn this down. People trying to contact me because I'm so cool. Samsung, you got it. You got it. I love that song because it feels so like... Remember, if the state helps you, the person is being parasitic. Like, it's... I'm so over this narrative. Like, what's the point of having a organized state if it isn't to provide food and shelter for the people? Like, what's the point of a civilization? What's the idea behind a civilization? What's the idea, like, if it's not going to provide food and shelter? And it isn't parasitic to provide food and shelter. Those people aren't parasites. Like it's blisteringly stupid to say so. Like, we're all created, randomly generated into the world. Nobody asked to be here. Here we are. We can either erect systems that feed and shelter. We are quantum refugees. Like, we're just here. You know, like this is something that I don't like. Like, our society is backward. We are backward, literally backward, in basically everything, and I think the most backward thing that we think is that instead of erecting stable systems that provide food and shelter as a default for the randomly generated people who come into the world, we need to have systems that exclude those people unless they're capable of selling themselves to a mafia, basically. Like, if you can't prove to a group of psychopaths that you should have food and shelter, then you get abandoned. Like, and you get called parasitic. Like, it is a form of gaslighting. And it's a form of gaslighting being done by professional liars and psychopaths who do not give a shit at all about the reality of what happens in the world. Like, everyone is randomly generated. We could very easily create systems that would just like deal with what it is to exist in the universe. Just like have systems of shelter distribution, have systems of food distribution. Like, these things would not be difficult to erect. Really, they wouldn't be. Like, we could guarantee that everybody has shelter. We could guarantee everybody has food. The holdup is that we have bought into the idea that the capitalist class is worth a damn. And they're not. Speaking of the Adam and Eve Genesis stuff, have you read about the theories around the ancient Sumerian cuneiform texts? Like, what theory? I've read some on this subject, but yeah, exactly. The loudest ones calling people parasites come from finance capital. Yeah, if you are in the investor class, you are by definition a parasite, because all you are doing is taking fake numbers that don't exist in the first place and giving those fake numbers to someone else who actually works, right? And then what happens? They give you more fake numbers while you do what? Nothing of consequence, right? Like, the investor class, and this incidentally is the stock market, right? It's as parasitic as it can be. Like, if the entire finance capital system vanished, if the entire investor class vanished, and instead of needing to respond to these guys at all, we responded to the people, our society would be better for it. Like, immediately. This is what's so funny about these guys. Sometimes I talk to these guys and they say, of the solutions that I'm putting forward, they say, well, that'll collapse the economy. And I say, yes, that's correct. Like, that's what I'm attempting to do here, right? I think that your thing is evil, and I would like evil to be defeated. And then they'll say something like, well, if you do that, then I'll just leave. And I say, fantastic. Great. I'm so looking forward to worthless parasites who are demonically evil leaving the society. That sounds absolute like an enormous win to me, right? Like, these finance capital people are literally walking around believing that they are achieving something or that they are good. And they are not. And we've got to confront these psychopaths with the reality that we're aware of them. Like, we know. Like, we know who they are. I am using myself for an example. I end up going to the hospital because of way too much stress on my plate, and yet I know that I have to go back right in order to further myself. Yeah, exactly. Like, it's nuts. It's nuts. Like, I take a look at these kids. These I think I closed it. But I take a look at these kids who are like homeless, trying to actually make a go of it, trying to actually live their lives. right? And I mean, this isn't nothing right here. But, like, think of the stress that they're going under. Think of the ridiculous. And many of them are going to come out the other side of that, and they're just not going to get the work. Right? Like, the system is chaos. Like, literally, the stats are like 25% of people who graduate don't go on to work in the field that they graduated with. So they don't end up using the degree in the first place. Right? It's just like, it's a sham. Like, there's no integration, right? And the expectation, the onus is completely put on the individual to make it work, but the system is chaos, so of course it doesn't. Some theologians posit that Genesis is essentially a Reader's Digest edition of the entire story, and it's pretty interesting. I'd say that's actually probably true. Like, I could be convinced of that. Like, Genesis itself is just a series of short stories, really. To create some kind of like historical background to humanity, right? And it's just a series of stories, all of which I think the worst thing that people do to Genesis, the Old Testament generally, is they and this comes from the evangelicals. They pretend as though the point of the book is to say that this is the morality by which you should live. Whereas it's far more accurate to say, like, no, this is a document that shows you the process of the growth of humanity. That we have been here, right? That we have evidence and documents that show we were here, right? And we've gone from here to another level, to another level, to another level. And I think the worst thing that we've done with the Bible is we put a cover on the other side of it. And we said, that's it, that's the end of it. So what a shitty thing to do. What a stupid thing to have done. Like, Christianity basically guarantees its irrelevance as time moves forward for having done that. That instead of this being a document that's constantly in this state of growth and this perpetual realization that there has been a moral ascension of humanity, and there has been, right? Like, we used to sacrifice human beings. We don't do that anymore. We used to crucify people. We don't do that anymore, right? Now, we're struggling with other moral issues in the society, right? Like invading other countries and bombing them because we think we're good, right? But to say that we have not, as a species, had some kind of moral growth is wrong. Like, it's factually wrong. And I also think that we need to remind ourselves that we can go back, right? Like, it's not linear. It's not like, oh, we did it, and now we can never slide back. Of course we can. And you read a text like the Bible, and you see, like, oh, there were people who lived like this. They lived like this. And that should be enough to tell you, like, boy, I'm not interested in that. They are proposing turning my shelter into transitional housing to artificially pump up the number of affordable housing units Toronto created so John Tory can use it for his re-election. What a loser, eh? Like, what a loser this John Tory guy turned out to be. When he was elected, he got elected after crack-smoking Rob Ford, who then did us all a favor and died. I was like, yeah, he seems like mayonnaise. Like, he seems like he's just going to be normal, right? But now, like, John Tory is a very dark figure in Toronto history. Like, clearing out the parks was a very dark moment. And the way that he's treating the shelters, the way that he's doing this kind of stuff with housing and his solutions for housing, it's very grim and very dark. Like I would be shocked to see even somebody like Rob Ford acting this way. Like, but to see John Tory doing it, it's like, whoa, yikes, man, yikes. Yeah, abandonment is the new normal of North American society. If one does not conform to the capitalists by working like slaves, you therefore have no right to survive, period. Welcome to chaos rule, yeah. And that we never got the full syrup deliberately. Oh, okay. Like, Genesis is the sequel to Revelation. I like the syrup better. I understood what you meant, so no, Genesis is the sequel to Revelation? I'm going to need more than that, bud. I just use science to dismantle the capitalist arguments. We are training people for jobs that are disappearing faster than we can train people. Yeah, Like, that's insane. Like, there's just no integration whatsoever. That, like, the only reasonable system is that you train someone to do a job that definitely exists, right? Like, that's the only rational way of doing this. And you have some kind of system in place so that people just can't fall through the cracks and they can't actually do stuff. And, like, I simply do not buy into this idea. And it comes from the fact that we're a backwards people. That, like, if you give people food and shelter, then they'll do nothing. It's like, what the fuck are you even talking about? Like, people love doing shit. They love doing shit. And like, if you said to people who had access to free food and shelter, hey, do you want to learn how to build buildings and, like, be part of a culture that builds cool shit in the world? Like, think about all the Minecrafters, right? Like, you walk up to these guys and you're like, hey, you know how you do Minecraft? And they're like, yeah. It's like, would you like to do that in the real world? Like, would you like to manifest this kind of stuff in the real world? A ton of them would be like, yeah, fuck yeah, of course. This idea that, like, everyone's just gonna sit around and do nothing. Like, it's an idea that can only come out of a backwards people like capitalism. Like we're so disconnected from what humanity itself even is that we're actually willing to tolerate these insipid, childish statements of, like, people won't do stuff. Like, what the fuck? Like, what's wrong with your brain? Like, of course people will do stuff. Will people do all the stuff that you want them to do so that you can do nothing while they slave for you? Probably not. But if you think that way, then you're backward. Genesis only makes sense when you interpret it as God created the land of Israel rather than the universe. I mean, I think it's like, the writers of the book of Genesis probably didn't know how the universe or the planet came together, right? That they're just sort of speculating, I think. That's a fine story. Like, it's fine. It's not even the worst one. The theory goes that we were never supposed to procreate, and the tree of knowledge was information on how we could procreate. Apparently, we were simply designed to be worker drones. All right. But God put a tree in the middle of it all, being like, and if you eat from this tree, you get dongs? Is that what it is? Like, you ate the tree and then it was just like, bonk. Is that what happened? Hey, the LDS Church believes that the Bible is not the last scripture and believe that there is a new revelation. As such, we got the DNC, Pearl of Great Price, and BOM. Fantastic. Genesis is the future, not the past. The Texali is, like, trying to get us all, like, you're trying to bend our brains here, bud. That's what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to like, create, like, this, like, time loop is what you're doing, which I love it. I love it. Time loops are cool to think about. Worker drones for these other beings. Apparently, there was more than one, and events took place in and around the Rift Valley, and this, ironically, is where evolutionists claim we came out of the... Look, this, all you're describing to me is, like, a different type of Star Wars. Like, that's really all this is, okay? Like, and this is 100% how I take it, is that, like, people made stories. Why? Because we generate stories. We're a stories generating people. And of course there's the question of, like, where did we come from? Like, what is all this stuff? And so it just sounds to me like you're describing, like, like, there's the basic story, right? Which is canon, that everybody goes like, yeah, that's the basic story. But then there's, like, the advanced stuff, right? Like, there's, like, the behind, like, oh, you watched The Matrix, but did you see the, like, comic book series that explained what happened over here? And there's, like, a video game that went along with it that kind of explained all of that as well. And then there was like a little there was another like cartoon series that actually really goes into like how did the war between humanity and the robots like come into being and like flourish, and like turns out that the humans had more to blame than the robots in it, and like all like, and so there's this whole other like universe that surrounds like the canon, and everybody knows the canon, but only like the real big nerds are like, let's get into the other shit. Like, it's the same to me as these like Star Wars nerds, and I'm just like, I think that the people who invest the most amount of time in this kind of stuff are mainly doing it because they think it's fun. Like, that's really what I think it comes down to. That they're just like, all of this Christian stuff and all of the way of talking about it and all of that, like, it has a deeper meaning to them, certainly, but I think it has a deeper meaning to them that they propel into just like, it's fun to think about this nerdy shit. And then they get like really, really deadly serious and like go to war over it. And you're just like, what the fuck? There haven't been any new revelations for over a century. Well, maybe I should get to it, Eric. Right? Maybe I could write the new revelation. Right? The book of Jonathan. Chapter 1. Shit's fucked, yo. The idea that there may have been more than one God ties into the godly jealousy stuff from Exodus. This is what I'm talking about, dude. You're just like, yeah, you can learn more about these passages and make more sense of it as long as you have this like extended universe stuff. Well, let me rephrase. We haven't had any new scripture, but there are new revelations and policies. I stand by my statement. Chapter 1. Shit's fucked, yo. Tree of knowledge had an apple. Apple is now a tree of knowledge. That's deep shit, dude. You're hitting us. Right? It is only after you accept wisdom that wisdom becomes acceptable. Humanity advanced during the Enlightenment and inventions happened minus the profit motive. Yeah, exactly, dude. Like it's so easily disprovable. And yet it's this persistent conservative idea that And what's so hilarious to me is that like the big like checkmate move that these guys would try to play on you was always, they would say, well, people will just sit around and play video games, right? People sitting around and playing video games is literally a multi-billion-dollar economy, right? People watch other people play video games online, and it's a multi-billion-dollar economy. Like, so all of these guys that are just shitting on the idea that people will just sit around and play video games, well, now that's like a full-time job that you can do, right? And like, you start to realize how they're literally just like, rock and roll is of the devil. That's the level of their thinking, and we're so far behind. Like, we're so far behind as a species and as a people, right? Like. And the falling behind thing here, I got a clip here that I'm going to show you guys just very quickly because I thought it was so interesting.
Top-down economy. You will never compete and win against them unless you take back the means of production.
They're lending money to countries to build ports and different infrastructure.
To build what?
Port,
and
harbors,
what's wrong with that?
And well, because
countries that need ports.
But they're making people dependent on. I mean, I know it's the same thing that we've done, which is
no, it's not.
Around the world.
They are far more humanistic.
You know, he talks about the art of the deal. China's perfected the art of the steal. We have a higher deficit with China now than we did before. We have the highest trade deficit
China
with
ate
Mexico.
Your lunch.
All right,
10%. China ate your lunch, Joe, and no wonder. They take our jobs, and we owe them $1.6 trillion. It's like, how does that happen? It's magic. You know what you call that? Magic.
You're too simple. Sometimes naive.
By 2035, the high-speed network will have grown to 70,000 kilometers, and the total rail length will extend over 200,000 kilometers.
President Xi's thoughts. You know, it's very clear.
They are a
Like, we are going to fall behind. And it's going to be significant. Like, even if you didn't want to talk about the threat of climate change, right? The impending existential doom of climate change. Like, we are going to fall so far behind the rest of the world as the rest of the world starts to figure out, oh, the way to actually exist in this plane of reality is by building infrastructure and building institutions that exist for the benefit of the people who are randomly generated to live in the world. Like, that's actually how the system actually works. That we are born into the world, we're here, we don't know what's going on, right? Like, we're just here. And while we're here, instead of attempting to scrabble for basic survival, right? Maybe we should have a stable system already in place, just completely implemented, completely there, so that everybody can have food and have shelter, and then can operate in the world from that foundation. And then from there, you can start to say to people, right? Hey, if you want to be part of the society that is attempting to build more stuff in the world, you go here. Hey, if you want to be part of the society that's actually interested in what is this place? Why are we here, right? There you go, right? If you want to be part of this or that, if you want to do this initiative or that initiative, if you want to focus on these, here it all is. It's all structured. It's all there. So that while you're here as a quantum refugee, as a temporary being resting their feet in the world, right? Instead of this place being a place of hardship, instead of this place being a place of burden and difficulty, instead of this place being a dimension that you send people to punish, we can literally create this place so that it is a refuge. We can literally create a place so that for the moment that you spend here, it's actually a reasonable experience. We can do that. We can definitely do that. We are simply choosing not to. And the backwardsness of our thinking is so entrenched that one of the most prominent and prevalent ideologies, which is libertarianism, is literally saying the way to advance the society and make everything better for everyone is to destroy the society. Like, we are arguably the most social creature on the face of the planet. The idea that we excel through competition is invalid in nature. I mean, like, I think the competition idea makes sense in a narrow way, right? Like, that's why they always end up using sports analogies. But they refuse to acknowledge that, like, yeah, but the sports competitions exist within a very collaborative environment that requires a great deal of competition or of cooperation, right? It takes a lot of work, in fact, to create factions to fight one another, right? So there's like this overarching system of collaboration that then creates systems of competition within it. But those systems of competition, like, you actually look at, like, basketball players are the great example, if you ask me. Like, all of these basketball players know one another, right? And they all, like, they're not trying to, like, they don't fucking hate each other, right? They're not there to be like, I'm gonna fucking destroy. Like, they all want to do their best, obviously, because that's how you get the most amount of money for yourself. But, like, the amount of collaboration that exists within that system overwhelms any idea that, like, yeah, the goal is competition. It's like the statement, you lose the forest for the trees, right? That's what it really comes down to. You just, like, these guys are literally looking at trees being like, man, I can't find that forest. If I was suddenly able to do anything, I would save the Rift Lakes in Africa. Awesome speciation Chichilids there. Amazing, dude. Hold on. Let's go. I hope you spelt this right. African Chichilids. Oh, we got like some fish. Are you one of these guys that if you could get away with it grinning, you'd have like a wall of an aquarium? You'd have like a big aquarium wall? I know people like that. I've got some an old friend of mine. She literally she's got like turtles, and she's complaining about how rent is too high, and she's worried she's not going to make rent. And I say to her, like, why don't you try to find a roommate? Try to move in with somebody, all that kind of stuff. And she literally looked at me and she said, no one would tolerate how many aquariums I have. And I'm just like, all right, man, all right, fish. That's rich. Orthodox Jews do not even believe in the existence of a Jewish state. I mean, Orthodox Jews believe a lot of weird things. I have seen religious scholars who made an entire argument that competition and individualism is an invention of the devil. Well, when you think about it, right? Like, what is the primary sin of the devil, right? The primary sin of the devil is that he doesn't want to subserviate his own individualism to the will of God, to the will of the Creator. That he would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, right? That's the John Milton phrase, and that this, and so I actually agree with that. That if you actually do listen to the Christian theology and you actually pay attention to like Christianity as an actual idea, the individualism is this like dark perception, right? And again, whenever I get into these conversations, I always end up talking about the book of Job, right? That like Job is inflicted by God basically saying, like the devil basically saying, let's fuck Job up, and God being like, yeah, okay, cool. And so they fuck Job up. And then his friends show up and they're like, hey, you did something wrong to deserve this. And Job is like, no, I fucking didn't, right? And there's this idea that persists and it's persistent in our society as well, and in our capitalist culture, is that if you are poor, it's because you've done something wrong. That's the argument, that if you are poor, you've done something wrong. Whereas the reality is that if the universe wants to jack you up, it's going to, right? Like, there's no reason to judge someone who has fallen on hard times and to try to individualize their experience, right? That's pointlessness, right? And stupid, frankly. It's a stupid thing to do, because if the universe wants to knock you over and if it wants to plow you down, it's going to. And if we were wise as a people, if we weren't so backward in the way we thought, we would say we should have institutions in place so that when the universe takes a mallet and smashes somebody down, they can actually go to a place and hopefully recover there, right? But we're so backward in the way that we think that we say, oh, well, if you've fallen over, it must be your own fault. Like, it's such a childish and reduced way of thinking about the world that we live in. And yet it's like the prevalent way that we think. The writers of the book of Genesis had no conception of a globe or a universe or anything else that we know to be true. Their perspective is strictly limited to the land of Israel. I don't know if that's 100% the truth, though. Like, we don't really know what these peoples knew. Like, there's lots of evidence to show that the Egyptians, for example, and ancient Egyptian society, as we know, like stretches well back into the stories of Genesis. Like, they knew the earth was round. They knew that there was, and like they were interacting with the stars and create like the pyramid structures and the structure of the Sphinx and all of this kind of stuff. Like, it all interacts with the universe and the stars around them, right? So the idea, like, these people had a concept of the universe, I think. And this narrative that you're presenting is probably not inaccurate as well. Like, the book of the Old Testament is very much tied up into the idea of Israel, and that Israel is like the land of God and all this kind of stuff, right? That's for sure like one of the main kind of theses of the story. But like, but they also had an understanding of the universe and an understanding of kind of more deeper things. Anyway. The entire Bible didn't have a perspective about a globe space. It was completely foreign to them. But they thought there were different levels of heavens and that there were waters that exist below us and above us. Yeah. I mean, it's just like Aristotle, right? Aristotle thought that the world was made up of 5 elements, right? Earth, water, air, fire, and ether. I think that's correct. And that's not right. And that's Aristotle, right? So we can be kind of forgiving. Competition is a result of scarcity. The issue is our economy is designed to maintain scarcity, not solve it. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Like capitalists are struggling with the issue of solar energy, right? Because if everybody suddenly has solar panels and energy can be free, then that's a big problem for the capitalist class. Because the capitalists themselves need to be completely, like, the capitalists are the worthless thing. Like, they're the thing that's worthless, right? So they're worried about systems arising that render them worthless. And so what do? They make sure those systems don't arise. And then cultures that actually don't give a shit about capitalists whatsoever, like China, right? They're going to move forward with that shit, and the capitalists will disappear, and the Chinese will be like, yeah, great. The parasites went away. Isn't that nice? We cured it. Link, please. What? Link to what? Sorry, Lawnmower Man. What are we linking? What are we linking? Oh, I promised that I would play this video here. This is a video that Rob, one of our regulars, put together. Forgive the tag here. I think he was inspired. Isabella Gamp, who has who I organized with, she put a video on Facebook, and of course Rob has commented on has put a commentary on this. He asked me to play it, and I'm going to. I'm going to do it right now, and I'm going to hit the bathroom because I've seen this.
The tenant-in-law just woke me up from a dead sleep, you know, and he's yelling into the bedroom, and he's yelling up, "Stop your fucking noise! Stop your fucking noise! You psycho bitch! You psycho bitch!" I was dead asleep. There's no noise up here. It's coming from down below here or somewhere else. But he's blaming me for it. You know, I called security. I can't live in this building, man. What the fuck? When I do get to sleep, he does it on purpose and wakes me up. You know, what the fucking shit is this? I can't stand this fucking building. I just can't take it anymore. What am I supposed to fucking do? Oh my god. Oh fucking god. I called security. And I said, listen, tell them, and they tell them to go fucking find out where the noise is coming from that's bothering them, instead of fucking waking me up. And what the fuck? It's the problem with these fucking units. You never know where the noise is coming from, unless you actually go out and fucking look.
I'm just going to jump ahead a little bit here, guys.
I'm going to call it, please. You know what? That's what I'm going to do.
I believe that what we just saw there from Isabella is genuine. If that is fake, and she's making this up, Will Smith should have his Best Actor Oscar removed and immediately transferred over to Isabella Gamp, since that was the performance of a lifetime. Isabella is living in 200 Wellesley Street East, which is the largest public housing project in North America. I was staffed there for 4 months. I quit. I couldn't hack it. 200 Wellesley is definitely in the top 5 worst Toronto community housing TCH buildings in the city. I got some additional context around this problem from a social worker who has been assigned to Isabella for the past 4 years. The downstairs neighbor is an Ontario Works or welfare recipient. They have animosity towards Isabella for whatever reason. The reason doesn't matter. The fact that Isabella is difficult to put up with is also irrelevant. What matters is that no one should have to suffer in the way Isabella is suffering unnecessarily. The professionals who are paid to deal with this sort of issue are TCH Security and the Toronto Police Service. Both agencies are refusing to intervene and are making up various excuses for their refusal to do their jobs. I know what Isabella is going through. I have felt her same pain in my own nightmare building with a psycho neighbor who wanted to have dance parties at 3 a.m. every other night. There is some hope for an easy solution. Isabella and her worker have put in for a medical transfer to another building. She likely will meet the criteria for this transfer, but it will take 2 months at least and up to 6 months. Condemning Isabella to this torment for the next 2 to 6 months or so would be unimaginable cruelty. Given that our state institutions have failed us, we have no choice but to take this kind of thing into our own hands. I will be visiting Isabella at her unit sometime soon with the intent of having a talk with the downstairs neighbor. Just a talk, that's all. If the torment continues, more visits may be necessary. The question of who will be there to do what needs to be done to end Isabella's suffering will separate the real ones from the fakes. It's times like these, when adversity comes, when life hits full strength, that men show who they really are. There are those who will step up, and those who will cower away. Ask yourself, what kind of a man are you?
That's a good one from Rob. And I know that Isabella has been dealing with this unit and this problem for a long, long time. That, you know, when you cut funding to places, it impacts real people. Like, real things happen to real people who are really, really struggling. Thank you, Rob. And I always like to keep Isabella, spread her around. She's a very powerful voice in this movement. She's very bold. She's fighting for her own survival. She's fighting to try to make it in this terrible system that, when I talk about the systems of abandonment, people like Isabella are the canaries in the coal mine for this. That we give less than the United States does to disabled people. When you do the basic number crunching for how much we give people on disability versus how much the rent is, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that they're not making it, right? It's not happening. And our solution, our barbaric, backward, callous, and cruel solution, is that these people should get jobs. It's like, do you understand what the definition of disabled is? Do you understand how disabilities actually work? Like, do you understand how what it means to be a disabled person? The idea that we can just force these people into jobs when it's by definition they can't work. I mean, we're a barbarous people. Like, we're very cruel, right? And if we don't actually, like, this is the reason, like, the reason why I organize with Isabella and I go to the protests that she puts forward, and is that I believe that we have to defend the weakest among us. And the weakest among us are clearly the disabled. And if we're not willing to stand up and defend disabled people, if we're not willing to stand up and defend the most vulnerable people as they attempt to organize protest, as they attempt to push back, right? As they refuse to go down silently, then we're a backwards people. Like, we are going to pay for this kind of stuff in serious and dramatic ways. We're going to fall behind in serious and dramatic ways. And of course, John Tory wants to privatize and defund government housing like the one Isabella is living in, right? Like, our society is depraved. We have a choice, right? We have a choice between barbarism or socialism, and we've chosen, right? We've chosen. This is one of the reasons for defunding the police. Those funds could go to funding mental health issues and those who can deal with them. I mean, we could... The idea that we need to have like a police force that's like 5 times more funding than any other institution, right? And of course the only institution that got an increase in funding under Doug Ford was the police, right? So the strategy is clear. Create an underclass of disabled and poor people, right? And then pay cops to beat them up. Like that's what we're doing. Like literally. Like it's not abstract. We're literally taking money that could be used to help the poor and the vulnerable, and we're giving it to cops to beat up the poor and vulnerable that we generate. That is what we're doing. It's Batman thinking, right? That instead of Bruce Wayne being expected to take his billions and billions of dollars of inherited wealth and creating any kind of social system that matters whatsoever to alleviate the poverty of the city and thereby reduce crime, right? He spends probably twice the amount of money it would cost to put together toys and dress in like little bat outfits and things to go blow those homeless people up. Like that's what we are doing as a people. And we're choosing it. Like we're not going to recover. We're not going to recover from the negative consequences of this line of thinking. Like we are going to experience 100 years of humiliation. I've had people tell me because I can write words on the internet, I can get a job. Yet many have no idea the barriers we face. It's sad we disabled have to keep fighting in our right to exist. Yeah, like, one of the things that I want these people, like, they don't understand that, like, okay, like, sit and write at the computer. And then while you're attempting to do that kind of work, I'm just going to come over and I'm going to take a hammer and I'm going to smash at your fingers. Right? Like... What? Why aren't you working? Why aren't you working? Because that's near as I can tell, that is how it is for disabled people. That it's an affliction. There are forces that are dealing, that are making it so that you can't really participate. Like, and once you actually interact with disabled people, like a big part of it is that the disabled have been rendered completely silent. Like they've been rendered invisible. That's really a big part of the truth, right? That because disabled people have been rendered invisible, because the difficulties that they encounter have been rendered invisible, right? Then people can believe whatever they like about it, right? All you have to do is work with disabled people for 10 minutes. Right? Take these people who are saying like, well, if you can write on the internet, then you can work a job. Take those people and have them actually work with a disabled person towards those ends, right? And see what that actually means. I genuinely think it would take them like 30 minutes to realize how stupid an idea this is and how cruel it is to actually believe and to say out loud. It comes from a place of deep ignorance and deep arrogance to believe this. And we just, it's the consequence of rendering an entire group of people in the society invisible. Like, when was the last time you saw a disabled person with any kind of level of representation in the media whatsoever? Like, the best that we get is like person in wheelchair. That's as far as that goes. And like, but the conversations surrounding the person in the wheelchair, like in media, whenever you get the person in wheelchair, right? And then they essentially just are a normal normal, but they're an able-bodied person. They're just in a wheelchair instead. That there are no hurdles for them, right? And maybe they'll get an episode where they talk about like some of the hurdles that they face, but it's always something like, oh, there's no on-ramp, right? I can't get up these stairs. It's not like literal, like crippling, destructive internal forces or anything like that. Like that's just not part of the conversation. And we're paying for it. We're paying for our willful ignorance and our stupidity, and it's going to turn around and blow up on us in big and significant ways. I highly doubt Isabella could afford to live in privatized government housing. Of course not. That's the point, right? Like like when are we going to start to realize that the billionaires are buying up this housing and sitting on it because they've got nothing else to buy, right? They don't care about turning around and renting it. They don't care about any of that kind of stuff. What these guys care about, the only thing these guys care about, is that when the systems of currency begin to collapse, as they are beginning to currently collapse, that's what this inflation crisis is all about, right? Once these currencies destabilize, then at least they'll have land. And that's what it's all about. It's all about having the hardest asset that exists in the world, which is land. That if you have land, then you're wealthy, right? It doesn't matter if it's developed. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter this, that, or the other thing, right? Having the hard asset of land in all situations is good. And if you have a lot of land, you are wealthy. And they don't care to rent this stuff out. They don't care. They're not trying to raise the price and then turn around and sell it. Sell it for what? Right? This unstable currency that's going to collapse? No, that's not what they're up to. Right? They're buying these properties and then they're sitting on them empty because they want the land. And so we end up with a situation where it spirals housing out of control and prices go crazy because they're essentially removing supply from the system. And this narrative that says we need to build more supply is so stupid because 90% of the units that are getting built are being picked up. Canadian cities have seen up to 90% of new real estate supply scooped up by investors. And they're just using it as a way to store their money. That's what it is. And if we don't actually confront this complete aberration, this demonic behavior, if we don't confront it, then we're just going to see an enormous swath of homelessness, which we're already seeing. We're already seeing a swath of homelessness. For God's sakes, kids are going to school living in tents and cars because they can't find a place to actually live. Like, I don't know what you need to see. Like, I don't know what we need. Do we know what is really going on with the alleged accusation of the Bucha massacre? I know that the Nazi collaborator Zelensky is banning videos that shows the atrocities done by his fellow men. I don't know enough to comment on it. There's too much going on. Well, that goes to the class purpose of the police. Special armed groups of men to maintain the class order. Yeah, that's right. And like, they're also a useful political force because they're a voting bloc, right? Like, oh sure, like if a conservative comes into power and increases the funding of the police force, right? Yeah, sure, I'll keep voting conservative, right? This guy lets me keep going to beat up minority groups and stuff. Yeah. Even renting a campground lot with a single outlet is too expensive now. Yeah. Didn't we determine that a minimum of $2,000 a month was necessary to get through COVID-19 assistance release and disabled people get a fraction of that? Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right, Isaac. Like, what a slap in the face to the disabled community, right? That we told, we outright admitted, our government admitted that people need $2,000 a month to survive. Well, the disabled aren't getting $2,000 a month, right? So what a slap in the face. How about a tweak to tenant law that gives every rental a fractional ownership share in the property they are renting? I mean, how about get rid of landlords? Like, how about just get rid of these guys? Like, for real. Like, turn every building into a co-op building. Get rid of these worthless parasites, right? Just do away with it. Get rid of them. Like, that's like, what's the point of this landlord class? It's an old, archaic, monarchical system. It's a feudal system. Get rid of it. You notice many of the pictures of the atrocities in Ukraine have crushed cars with no broken glass surrounding them, discovered dead bodies, no blood surrounding them. Because it's war, there's too much going on. There's too much going on, and everybody has incentive to lie, right? So I don't really want to report one way or the other. I like to focus on what people are saying about it, what the general analysis of the military movement actually is. But of course, I mean, the Ukrainians are going to lie, the Russians are going to lie, everybody's going to lie, right? So I just assume that's the case. The treatment of disabled people really show the true colors of the society. Yeah, these people are deemed not useful and profitable and therefore expendable. Yep. And the media asks why suicide rates are at an all-time high. Yeah. Funny they came up with $2,000, but $700 was seen as enough at the same time. Yeah. My mother legit told me people don't war for land no more, and I believed her. I mean, we don't war for land, we war for resources, and we just buy land, right? Yep, 90%. No, I'm not kidding. Like, and I called it. I said this months ago, right? Like, build as much as you want. You could build 1 billion units. You could literally convert every section of land to housing, and this would happen, right? Play a single game of Monopoly. Play a single game of Monopoly. This is where the stupid illiteracy of the libertarian people come. Like, you can really point it out. Like, play a single game of Monopoly. What happens? Right? The structure of the piece is that eventually all of the property is owned by a single person. Doesn't matter how much you build. You could put 50 boards beside one another. You could expand you could do that in the middle of the game, right? You could do that in the middle of the game. You could create 50 times the amount of properties and 50 times the amount of housing, right? And what's the result? One person will own all of the property. Like, that's how it goes. And if you don't understand that, then you can be a libertarian, right? Because the entire structure of capitalism goes this direction. And the idea, and the libertarians don't have a response to this because their ideology doesn't exist in reality, right? It's a fairy tale dream that can only be put up by people who don't actually know or care to know how the structure of anything works, right? In the US, BlackRock and Goldman Sachs are literally offering people cash for homes, then becoming the renter. Yeah. And I mean, we're seeing this monopoly system erect itself, right? BlackRock and Vanguard own the stock market, right? They own the vast majority of the shares. And not only that, they own shares in each other. So BlackRock and Vanguard are essentially the top level monopolists. And they work very hard to make sure that nobody knows who the primary investors of BlackRock and Goldman Sachs are. But we know to a degree, and it's exactly the people you think it would be. It's the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, the Morgans, right? It's the old family wealth, right? The Queen of England, right? Queen Victoria, like the Queen Victoria, but her family, right? Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure this out. And what's wild to me is that there's so much like conspiracy mind going on right now. And it's like, but we don't need any of that. Like, there doesn't need to be some sort of global conspiracy about any of this stuff. We know what's happening, right? There's an ownership class. Vanguard, BlackRock. They own all of the shares. They own the stock market. They own all of the businesses. They own all of it, right? You don't need a conspiracy here. You don't need to have like a Davos and the Great Reset and all of this kind of crazy shit. Like, none of that matters, right? There's an ownership class. We know who they are. They own everything, and the goal is to keep ownership of it. And they don't care to embark on any kind of improvement of the society or anything like this. Their goal is to make you generate wealth for them. That's their only goal, right? Like, they're completely disinterested in creating new institutions and new structures of any sort, because that would require them spending the money, and they're not interested in it, right? They're interested in making a lot of money for themselves. And so it really falls back on what we were saying before, right? That it's better to rule in hell than serve in heaven, right? So they're fine if the Texas power grid collapses, and they're fine if the rail system falls into disarray and disrepair. They're fine if the highway system turns into gravel. They're fine if the bridges collapse. They don't care. Like, they're fine if all of these supply chains and all of this kind of stuff falls apart. Like, they're fine with that. Why? Because Americans don't have any money anyway, right? The extraction process is basically complete in America, right? So what are they doing? They're extracting that wealth, right? And they're building pedophile sex islands, like Jeffrey Epstein's island, right? And then they're turning around and they'll buy up all the land, the way that Bill Gates has been doing, right? Like, and now we've got Canadian cities have seen up to 90% of new real estate supply scooped up by investors. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure out where this is going, right? And you don't need a big conspiracy about it, right? You don't need to create this incredible false narrative, or dig deep, or get into the QAnon shit, or any of this kind of stuff to see that it's obviously the case, right? I think the weirdest part about all of this that's going on is that, like, but the conspiracy aspect of it really does show you how confused everybody is, and how difficult it is to pierce through it all and to actually see past it all and see what is the truth. That the conspiracy people, like, they want to believe that there's some, like, evil specter group or something like this, when in the reality it's just like a couple of families who own all of the property via a system of capital. Like, and we know who they are, and they're very smart, though, right? The actual owners of the society, right? The actual people who own the place, who own the shares, who own the businesses, who own this stuff, they're very, very smart, because they understand that the best defense is to ensure that no one knows they exist in the first place, right? You take a look at somebody like David Thompson. David Thompson, in my view, is a brilliant man, because he's the richest man in Canada and nobody knows about him. His official title is the third Baron of Fleet. He's a baron, literal inheritor of monarch money, right? He owns probably about 10% of every business that exists in Canada. He is one of the core owners of the society, and nobody knows about him. And nobody knows about him because he doesn't want them to know about them. And it's the same of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and all these guys. Like, these guys are more than happy to have someone like Elon Musk out in the front, being like, look at me, I'm the super genius Elon Musk, right? Because if a revolution occurs, or if some kind of political drama happens, who do you think is going to take the heat? Right? It's not going to be the actual owners of the society, right? And the actual owners of the society, like, they're completely fine if Elon Musk has a whole pile of money because they own the money supply, right? Like these people are deeply entrenched in the money creation system itself. And so they don't care if Elon Musk has a big pile of money off on this. Like, who cares? They own that big pile of money. Like, they're the bank. And there's no conspiracy. Like, that's the thing that, like, I had somebody come in here fairly recently and is like really, really doubling down on the idea of like the Davos stuff, the World Economic Forum. Like this whole thing that came through not that long ago, and everybody's losing their shit about it. And oh my God, the World Economic Forum and all of the world powers get together and plan against us. And oh my goodness, they're doing all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like that's just the politicians getting together and having a chat, right? It's just the surrogates, right? Like, and why shouldn't there be like a World Economic Forum where the world powers like send a delegate in order to have a conversation, right? Not that anything meaningful has actually happened from any of that stuff, right? It's all just pageantry, right? The real owners, right, are BlackRock and Vanguard. And it's obvious. And how do I know they're the real owners? Because they own all the shares. Like, it really doesn't take a genius to figure this out. Like, the people who own the society are the people who own the society. Obviously. But there's so much conspiracy going around because nobody has had the time or the ability to actually investigate any of this stuff in a meaningful way. And it's very easy to distract people or to send people in incorrect paths, right? The World Economic Forum stuff has been really useful for the capitalists, right? Get everybody to hyper-focus on the World Economic Forum. And I'm not trying to say that the World Economic Forum is unimportant, but it has nothing to do with who owns the place, right? Even EI is garbage, yeah. Welfare is around $700. Oof. Better hope you got an extra room for your kids to move back into. Yeesh. Average rent here is $1,500. Next year, I bet it'll be $2,000. Yeah, just because they feel like it. Exactly, because they don't care. Don't expect Trudeau and Jagmeet government to help the struggling poor anytime soon. Yeah, I'll be curious to see what their budget looks like. Well, that'll be Thursday's show. I have no faith in electoral politics for anything to be done at this point. Yeah, like we need to surround the halls of power, right? Like that's really what it is. That we have to actually get enough steam going to surround the halls of power. Because if we don't, then they're completely disinterested. Like they don't care. Like walk by them, they don't give a shit. Like take 1,000 people and walk by their place, they don't care. This is the perfect example of why capitalism itself, the need for money, need to be burnt from the heart. Yeah. A UBI combined with a massive amount of government subsidized housing is the only way to prevent the looming catastrophe that's just over the horizon. I'm honestly like DM, like the housing, this housing crisis is actually so easy to resolve. Like that's the thing I think that's the most embarrassing part about it, is that all you would have to do to immediately resolve the housing crisis, and it would be instant. Like in the course of a year, we would all be looking at the issue going, how is that ever a problem, right? Create a wicket at Service Canada where people can go into, fill out their information, right? I don't have a house, right? Give their information to the person at the wicket, and then the person at the wicket takes a house from the person who has the most houses, right? Because we know, like they register, like we know. So you take the house from the person who has the most houses, and you give it to the person who doesn't have a house. Problem solved. John, wouldn't that collapse the housing market? Yes. John, wouldn't that mean that a bunch of capitalists would leave? Yes. I don't care at all. These people are worthless, despicable, psychopathic parasites. take their houses away from them, give them to people who need houses. Problem solved. Stop worshiping these parasites. Stop worshiping these psychopaths. Stop pretending like they offer anything to the society that's valid at all. Take their house, give it to the person who has no house. Very straightforward, very simple, problem solved. Yes, it would collapse the housing market. Yes, it would mean that capitalists would stop this grift. Yes, it means that it would chase the capitalists out of the system. Yes, all of those things are absolutely the case. That's the point. So the idea that we couldn't do it, well, of course we could. It would be easy to do. Really, this is how embarrassing this conversation is. Is that not only could we resolve it, it would be easy to resolve. And the only people who would care about the consequence are psychopaths. So, who cares? And we can't put two and two together on this. We can't figure this out, right? At all. Because we're so entrenched in our subservience to these psychos. Like, we genuinely believe that they're worth something. Like, I have conversations with people fairly regularly, and they'll say to me like, "Well, John, CEOs are important," and I go like, "No, they're not. Like, CEOs are the least important person. I remember working for an enterprise that did not have a CEO for a year. Like, we just didn't have a CEO for a year, and everything was great. The place ran really nicely, right? Everybody did what they did, and then we got a CEO, and then things got bad, right? Our lives were worse when the CEO came in. Why? Because you got to pay for the CEO who does nothing, like literally nothing. Their job is just to make sure that when the shareholders say make line go up, line go up. So they're a worthless middleman in the middle of it, because instead of the shareholders themselves making line go up, they have this guy make line go up. And you know what that guy always does? Is that he turns around and looks at the person he's hired to make line go up and says, make line go up. Like, if I was earning $100 million a year, I would just hire people to do work and then go golf or whatever, right? Like, do whatever I wanted to do, because, well, I'm not going to make line go up. That's not my job. My job's not to make line go up. My job's to make other people make line go up. Right? It's called delegation, right? And like, people are like flabbergasted at this, that I say that CEOs are worthless. Like, they're utterly worthless. They provide negative value to companies, if you ask me. Like, the only value that a CEO actually has to these psychos is that it means that the investors don't have to do it, right? So the only people who think a CEO is valuable are people who are even more worthless, right? So you have a parasitical, worthless class of do-nothings. Hire someone who's slightly less parasitical and worthless in order to make line go up in this specific company. Like, yeah, we can do away with these guys. Like, they're a negative drain on our society in huge ways. I'd say statistically and historically speaking, it's a very probability that the powers that be steer this ship full speed ahead into that long S storm. Honestly, I just think they're looking at like line go up. Like, that's it. I recently did narration for an economics textbook, and the capitalist class is just now starting to implement analytical structures into their share buying system that even acknowledges that climate change exists. And they're starting to do that because they're beginning to realize, oh, if this all burns down, then we don't make money, right? That if we invest in something and then climate change blows it up, we lose money, right? Something we've been saying for a fucking long time, right? You can't grow food in a desert, you know? And so, like, but what that tells you is, like, these guys are incompetent losers. Like, they literally have been operating on the premise this entire time The entire time that they've had their surrogates in the government pretend like they care about climate change, they've still been investing as if climate change doesn't exist at all, right? That there's been no environmental risk assessment this entire time. And so they've just been doing whatever, right? The individuals will work it out, all this kind of stuff. And then finally their investments are starting to flood and burn down, right? And they're starting to say, maybe we should actually give a shit about this kind of stuff. And they're just starting to do that right now. Like, and you know that they're still not going to care, right? You know that they're still just going to be like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, we need to accept that UBI will never happen. Scarcity and homelessness will be the new normal. We all now need to adapt to these changes and try to live on nothing. Yeah, it's the Trudeau way. That's how I'm trying to structure my life. Like, I do this YouTube channel, and to the people who donate and to the Patreons I have, thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. I hope one day to live the dream that this channel is the thing that actually pays my rent. And then when I'm not doing this, I'm reading audiobooks. Right? And that's basically what I do. And I'm very grateful that I even get to do that, right? That I have been given this voice, this gift that I have, the ability to read as well as I can. And even then, it's still a hope. Like, I hope it works out. Like, I hope that I can do that. And I think that would be a very blessed life in this situation. But I know that most people don't have that. Right? That most people are scrabbling around trying to find any kind of work that they can get or any kind of thing that they can do in order to just stabilize. Right? And why? Because we need to pay rent to some parasite who literally just sits on the money. Right? Just like literally, they offshore it. It's sitting in a hole somewhere. Right? We could literally have the rent. We could literally take the rent and have it. And they still would be making money hand over fist, right? That it's just basic animalistic greed and stupidity at this point. Like, and it's just basic. I said from day one, the Great Reset is just a farce, that nothing is going to come out. Read Schwab in the Great Reset. He wants to reset capitalism because this forum has gone as far as it can. If you ask me, like, the Great Reset narrative is very simple, right? The powerful know that this is going into a free fall decline. Like, they know. They're very aware of it. How do we know that that's the case? Because they're doing it. Like, the owners own the place and they know what they're doing. They see that there is a decline coming. It's observable. You can measure it. They know it's coming. And how do we know? Because they're causing it, right? And so what they're doing is creating false narratives to try to placate the public into accepting what's going on. They're controlling the decline. They're controlling the descent, right? So you think about what they did with climate change, right? So they gave us 10 years of like, well, the science isn't in both sides, right? They gave us 10 years of that. And then they gave us another 10 years of green movement and all this, when really all that was putting green paint on all their shit, right? And now we're getting a period of time where it's climate emergency. We hear your pain. Let's enact policies that are literally given to us by the fossil fuel industry, right? So it's all bullshit. Right? It's all gaslighting. It's all just total bullshit. Observably so. Right? Observably so. And it's just to try to stall and buy time. That's all it is. That's all it's about. Stall and buy time. That every single time the populace has a big upswell of support, like 100,000 people in the streets of Toronto, for example, they know that they got to actually do something, but they do the most tepid, smallest possible thing, right? So like the carbon tax, for example, like literally a tax on the populace that the fossil fuel industry didn't have to pay, right? Like as barbarous a solution as you can find, and we cheered for it. And and so when I see the Great Reset, all I think about is, oh, this is just another way to control dissent. That the powerful can say, we're resetting everything, guys. This is the reset, right? So we're going to go into the reset, and it's going to be tumultuous, and it's going to be, oh, goodness, it's going to be like this. But don't worry, it's all resetting, and then everything's going to be great, and everybody's going to be able to participate more, and we're going to build a whole bunch of wealth and all that kind of stuff. And I'd say that's going to buy them probably about 5 to 10 years, because we're very stupid this way. And then once we hit that point where obviously things didn't get better, and obviously the tumultuousness is just still happening, and obviously this is just the new, like the Great Reset results in this chaos, right? It's just propaganda in order to sell us on an idea that there's going to be some reset. And the idea of a reset is actually very appealing to people's minds, because it means like, oh, we'll reset and then we can move from there and we can actually have growth and all that kind of stuff. There's no reset. It's not coming. It's just a lie, right? Like, I don't understand why we take anything these guys say at face value anymore. They're professional gaslighters. They're professional liars. Like, if they're talking, they are lying. It's very straightforward. It's very straightforward. And like most of the time, whenever these guys take a position, I just take the opposite position. I don't have sources. I don't have evidence. I don't have facts. I don't have anything. I literally just hear them talk. This is what I did with the Uyghur genocide narrative, right? That like they stood up and said, there's a genocide in China. And I immediately went, probably not. And I was right. But I didn't start by investigating it and being like, is that right? I literally just said, probably not. And it's just the case with these. They're professional liars. It's all they know how to do. And they lie about things they don't have to lie about. Like, that's the part of it that's so astounding. They lie about things that they simply don't have to lie about. They just lie anyway, because it's all they know how to do, right? Guess all we can do is watch it crash and burn. The majority of people aren't going to surround the halls of power. I wish it weren't so, but the truth is all we can do is watch it burn. I challenge this idea, Matthias. I think the majority of people will surround the halls of power. That's the reason why I do this. Is that I think that eventually people will say, fuck all this, fuck what you guys are doing, we are going to go do this, and we are going to participate in it. And you can see this with moments like the Occupy Wall Street movement. You can see this with moments like the climate change rallies that happened here in Toronto, right? These upswings of of populist support, right? They do happen. They have happened in recent memory. These are not old events, right? And stories like this, right? Like, people are becoming frustrated and fed up, and it is just a matter of time. The question is when. That's the question nobody has the answer to. No, and nobody ever knows. Like, that's the part that makes it kind of mystical in a way. That like every single major political moment that has happened in this country, the organizers say, yeah, we didn't expect this many people to come. Every single time. Of course, what they'll do is attempt to financialize the burning down and create goofy derivative. Have you considered having Marxist audiobooks here? People are doing that work. Like, that's the reason I don't do that work, Watson, is because people are already doing that work. And so I don't need to double up on it. Like, most Marxist texts, maybe what I should do is create like a compilation of links. I should find those audiobooks and create like a list that we could show. That would be a good idea. But God, I'm just trying to pay my rent right now. But that is a good idea, Watson, to create like a list of audiobooks, Marxist audiobooks, and get them on. But like Socialism for All, he does a lot of audiobook work. and his stuff is really good. We could literally have readings here. That's not a bad idea. That's not a bad idea. Did you have a text in mind, Watson? Part of the issue, of course, is that might not be a bad idea, actually. I don't mind that. Occupy Wall Street was awesome until billionaires got bored and had Obama shut it down. Lonnie, I think it was more calculated than this. That I think the billionaire class was fine with the Occupy Wall Street movement being where it was, right? They didn't surround the halls of power, and so they end up not really being a threat. You just kind of go around them, right? It ends up being just sort of a freak show for the billionaire class, right? And on top of that, the encampments were beginning to fall apart. And so if your goal was to point to communism or socialism and say, oh, it doesn't work, you could just always have this encampment here, right? The thing that happened with Occupy was that it began to communicate its ideals coherently to the Tea Partiers. That's where it got really scary for the billionaire class, because the Tea Partiers were on the right, and their statement was government is the problem. A classic Reaganistic kind of statement, classic libertarian sort of statement. Government is the problem. Well, the occupiers were saying that corporations are the problem. And very steadily, the occupiers were the ones that started to understand, wait a minute, corporations, the Tea Parties are onto something, right? Corporations are not exclusively the problem, right? That corporations use the government by infusing itself with the government, that there's been a coup d'etat, that corporations and governments have actually come together. But you have occupiers here and Tea Partiers here. And so the occupiers started to go like this, and the Tea Partiers started to go, oh, wait a minute, you hear what these guys are saying? Oh, wow. And if these two forces had have actually connected in with one another, and if they had have actually been able to articulate cogently the reality that the issue is that the corporate power structure has overwhelmed and taken over the political system, then something really scary and dangerous could have happened for the billionaires, which is that you could have had a working class movement of right-wing and left-wing allied people relying on class purposes, class reasons, to overthrow the corporate power structure. That was beginning to happen. It was observable. You could see it. And when that started to happen, they cleared the encampments. Because you can't allow that to happen if you're a billionaire. You can't allow the right and the left to actually connect with one another and understand that the complaints and the issues that the right wing have, the complaints that the left wing have, are actually merged. They're the same issue. Because if those two forces coalesce and come together, that's the end of it for these corporate guys. They won't be able to withstand it. That's why they're so desperate to try to keep this all separated, identity politics, like keep everything in that kind of layer, divide the populace along those lines. Because if the populace comes together and realizes that their issue is a class issue, that's the end of it. And that's why the Wall Street encampments were cleared, to ensure that never happened. Okay, guys. I like this idea, by the way, Watson. Like, Watson, are you talking about like me reading the book out loud, or like what's the framework of this? Maybe bring this back to us, okay? All right, guys. Always remember, you are a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. The billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars in the hopes that you won't realize it and you'll just stay the good little commodity that they need you to be. Rebel. Revolt. Repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.